The crisp Montana air filled my lungs as I stirred from a deep sleep, my senses slowly coming to life. The familiar scent of pine and damp earth wafted through our tent, a reminder of the vast wilderness surrounding us. It was then that I heard my brother's excited voice, piercing through the early morning calm. "Jake, wake up, man, you've got to see this." Tom's voice was urgent, tinged with a mix of enthusiasm and something else I couldn't quite place. I groaned, rolling over in my sleeping bag. "What time is it?" I mumbled, my voice thick with sleep. "Just past dawn," Tom replied, already unzipping the tent flap. "Come on, I found fresh tracks, big ones." That got my attention. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "What kind of tracks?" Tom's head poked back into the tent, his eyes wide with excitement. "I'm not sure, but they're like nothing I've ever seen before. And there's blood, Jake. Whatever it is, it's injured." I felt a surge of adrenaline course through me. We'd been tracking game in these woods for years, but something in Tom's voice told me this was different. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, quickly pulling on my boots and grabbing my rifle. As I emerged from the tent, the cool morning air hit me full force, sending a shiver down my spine. Tom was already at the edge of our campsite, crouched down and examining something on the ground. I joined him, my breath catching in my throat as I saw what had him so worked up. The tracks were enormous, easily twice the size of a bear's, with strange claw marks that seemed to dig deep into the earth. And there, unmistakable in the early morning light, was a trail of dark, viscous blood. "What do you think it is?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tom shook his head, his brow furrowed. "I don't know, but it's big and it's hurt. We should follow it." I hesitated, a feeling of unease settling in my stomach. "Are you sure that's a good idea? Maybe we should call the ranger station, let them know what we found." Tom stood up, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. "Come on, Jake. Where's your sense of adventure? This could be the discovery of a lifetime. Besides, if it's hurt, it might need our help." I sighed, knowing I couldn't talk him out of it. "All right, but we need to be careful. Let's pack up and get moving before the trail goes cold." We quickly broke camp, stuffing our gear into our backpacks and making sure our rifles were loaded. As we set off, following the strange tracks and blood trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something far beyond our experience. The forest seemed to close in around us as we trekked deeper into its heart. The towering pines blocked out much of the morning sunlight, casting long shadows across our path. The usual chorus of birdsong and rustling leaves was noticeably absent, replaced by an eerie silence that set my nerves on edge. "It's too quiet," I murmured, more to myself than to Tom. My brother nodded, his eyes scanning the surrounding trees. "Yeah, it's like the whole forest is holding its breath." We pressed on, the tracks leading us further into unknown territory. I found myself checking our GPS more frequently, marking our path in case we needed to make a quick retreat. The blood trail was becoming more pronounced, dark splatters staining the undergrowth. "Whatever it is, it's losing a lot of blood," Tom observed, his voice tight with concern. "We must be getting close." As if in response to his words, a bone-chilling howl suddenly echoed through the woods. We both froze, our rifles instinctively rising to our shoulders. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Not quite wolf, not quite bear, but something altogether alien and terrifying. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. Tom shook his head, his face pale. "I don't know, but it came from up ahead. Come on." We moved forward more cautiously now, every sense on high alert. The forest seemed to press in even closer, the air growing thick and oppressive. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged in the unnatural silence. Suddenly, Tom held up his hand, signaling me to stop. He pointed to the ground in front of us, and I felt my blood run cold. The tracks we had been following, so clear and distinct up to this point, simply vanished. The blood trail, too, came to an abrupt end, as if whatever we were tracking had simply ceased to exist. "This is impossible," Tom muttered, crouching down to examine the ground more closely. Tracks don't just disappear like this. I scanned the surrounding area, looking for any sign of disturbance, any clue as to where our quarry might have gone. But there was nothing, just undisturbed forest floor stretching out in all directions. Maybe it doubled back, I suggested, though I knew it was unlikely. We would have seen if the tracks had turned around. Tom stood up, his face a mask of confusion and frustration. No, look at the blood trail. It stops right here, same as the tracks. It's like whatever made these just vanished into thin air. A chill ran down my spine at his words. The feeling of wrongness that had been building since we entered the forest suddenly intensified. I couldn't shake the sense that we were being watched, that something was out there, hidden just beyond our perception. "Tom," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I think we should get out of here. Now." My brother turned to look at me, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. The thrill of the hunt was warring with his own growing sense of unease. For a moment, I thought he might argue, insist on pressing on despite the danger. But then his shoulders sagged and he nodded. "Yeah, you're right. This is way beyond us. We need to report this to the authorities, let them figure it out." Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. As we turned to retrace our steps, another howl split the air, closer this time, and filled with a hunger that made my blood run cold. "Run!" I yelled, all thoughts of stealth forgotten. We took off, crashing through the underbrush, our heavy packs bouncing against our backs. I could hear something moving through the forest behind us, branches snapping and leaves rustling. Whatever it was fast, much faster than us. "There!" Tom shouted, pointing ahead. "I see the trail." Hope surged through me as I spotted the familiar path we had taken into the forest. If we could just reach it, we might have a chance of outrunning whatever was chasing us. But as we burst out of the trees onto the trail, my hope turned to ash. The path ahead of us was blocked by a massive fallen tree that hadn't been there before. And there, carved deep into its bark, were claw marks that matched the tracks we had been following. We skidded to a halt, panting heavily, our eyes wide with fear. Slowly, we turned to face the forest we had just fled, rifles raised and ready. The woods had gone silent again, but this time, the silence felt expectant, as if the entire forest was waiting with bated breath. I could feel eyes upon us, watching, calculating. "Jake," Tom whispered, his voice trembling slightly, "what have we gotten ourselves into?" Before I could answer, a twig snapped somewhere in the shadows before us. We both swung our rifles toward the sound, fingers tightening on triggers, and then, emerging from the gloom, we saw it. A shape that defied description, semi-transparent and shifting, like heat haze given form. As it moved closer, I could make out glowing eyes and the glint of razor-sharp teeth. In that moment, I realized that our role had changed. We were no longer the hunters. We had become the prey. The forest seemed to close in around us as Tom and I stood frozen, staring at the spot where the tracks had inexplicably vanished. The silence was oppressive, broken only by our ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart in my ears. "This doesn't make any sense," Tom muttered, dropping to his knees to examine the ground more closely. "Tracks don't just disappear like this." I kept my rifle at the ready, scanning our surroundings. Maybe it jumped or climbed a tree? Tom shook his head, frustration evident in his voice. "No, Jake. Look at the blood trail. It stops right here, too. Whatever this thing is, it didn't jump or climb. It's like it just ceased to exist." A chill ran down my spine at his words. "We need to get out of here, Tom. This isn't right." My brother stood up, brushing the dirt from his knees. "We can't leave now. We've come too far. Whatever made these tracks, it's something new, something unknown. We have to find it." I was about to argue when a twig snapped behind us. We both whirled around, rifles raised, but there was nothing there, just the endless sea of trees and underbrush. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Tom nodded, his eyes wide. "Yeah, something's out there." We stood back to back, slowly rotating, trying to cover all angles. The forest had gone eerily quiet again, as if holding its breath. I could feel sweat beating on my forehead despite the cool air. "Maybe we should set up camp," Tom suggested after a few tense minutes had passed. "It's getting late, and we're not going to find anything in the dark." I nodded, relief flooding through me at the thought of stopping our search. "Good idea. Let's find a clearing and set up. We can start fresh in the morning." We moved cautiously through the forest, eventually finding a small clearing that seemed suitable for our camp. As we began to unpack our gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Tom," I said as I unrolled my sleeping bag, "do you get the feeling that—" I never finished my sentence. A cold breath on the back of my neck made me freeze. It was like ice sliding down my spine, and I knew with absolute certainty that something was right behind me. Slowly I turned around, my heart hammering in my chest. But there was nothing there. Just empty air and the trees beyond. "Jake? What's wrong?" Tom asked, noticing my pale face. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. I felt something, like someone was breathing on my neck. Tom's eyebrows furrowed. "There's nothing there, bro. You're letting this place get to you." But I could see the doubt in his eyes, the way he glanced nervously around the clearing. He felt it too, even if he wouldn't admit it. As night fell, we huddled around our small campfire, jumping at every sound from the surrounding forest. We tried to keep our spirits up with forced conversation and weak jokes, but the tension was palpable. "Remember that time we went camping in Yellowstone?" Tom said, trying to lighten the mood. "And that bear stole all our food?" I managed a weak chuckle. "Yeah, and you tried to chase it off with a stick. Not your brightest moment." "Hey, it worked, didn't it?" Tom grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. As we prepared to turn in for the night, I couldn't help but voice my concerns. "Tom, I really think we should head back in the morning. This, whatever it is, it's way out of our league." My brother was quiet for a long moment, staring into the dying embers of our fire. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah, you're right. First light, we'll pack up and head back to civilization. Call in the experts." Relief washed over me. "Good. Let's get some sleep then. We've got a long hike ahead of us tomorrow." We crawled into our sleeping bags, the fire reduced to glowing coals. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch had me on edge, imagining monstrous shapes lurking just beyond the reach of our fading firelight. I must have dozed off eventually because the next thing I knew, Tom was shaking me awake, his face pale in the pre-dawn light. "Jake, wake up. You need to see this." I sat up groggily, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "What is it? What's wrong?" But as I looked around our campsite, I realized I didn't need to ask. Our gear, which we had carefully arranged the night before, was strewn about the clearing. Our backpacks had been torn open, their contents scattered. Deep gouges marked the trees surrounding our camp, as if something with massive claws had been circling us all night. "What the hell?" I breathed, scrambling out of my sleeping bag. Tom was already examining the destruction. It happened while we were asleep. How did we not wake up? I joined him, my mind reeling. This is impossible. We would have heard something. The fire would have kept animals away. As we surveyed the damage, trying to salvage what we could of our supplies, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, on one of the trees at the edge of our clearing, was a set of strange markings. They looked almost like writing, but in no language I'd ever seen before. "Tom," I called, my voice shaking. "Look at this." My brother came over, his eyes widening as he saw the markings. "What is that? Some kind of code?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but I've got a bad feeling about this. We need to leave. Now." Tom nodded, no longer arguing. We hastily packed what remained of our gear, not bothering with breakfast. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows through the trees, We set off in what we hoped was the direction of the trail that had led us here. But as we walked, a sinking feeling began to grow in the pit of my stomach. The forest looked different in the morning light, unfamiliar. I pulled out our GPS, only to find that it was no longer working. "Tom," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice, "I think we're lost." My brother stopped, looking around with growing concern. "That's not possible. We came from this direction, I'm sure of it." But as we pressed on, it became increasingly clear that we were going in circles. Every clearing looked the same, every tree identical to the last. The sun seemed to barely move in the sky, as if time itself was playing tricks on us. Hours passed, and we were no closer to finding our way out. Exhaustion and fear began to take their toll, and I could see the strain on Tom's face. "We need to stop," I said finally, my legs aching from the endless walking. "We need to think this through." Tom nodded wearily, and we slumped down against a fallen log. As we sat there, trying to catch our breath and figure out our next move, a low growl echoed through the forest. We both shot to our feet, rifles at the ready. The growl seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding us. "Run!" Tom whispered, his voice tight with fear. We took off, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces. The growl followed us, growing louder, closer. I could hear something moving through the forest behind us, keeping pace effortlessly. "There!" Tom shouted suddenly, pointing ahead. "I see a clearing." Hope surged through me as we burst out of the trees, only to die as quickly as it had come. We skidded to a halt at the edge of a steep cliff, a sheer drop of hundreds of feet before us. Panting heavily, we turned to face the forest we had just fled, our backs to the cliff edge. The growling had stopped, but the silence that replaced it was even more terrifying. "What now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tom shook his head, his eyes never leaving the tree line. "I don't know, Jake, I really don't know." As we stood there, trapped between the cliff and whatever was hunting us, I realized that our simple hunting trip had turned into something far more dangerous. We were no longer just lost in the woods. We were caught in a game where we didn't know the rules, facing an opponent we couldn't see or understand. And as the trees before us began to move, shimmering like a mirage in the desert heat, I knew that our fight for survival was only just beginning. The first rays of sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy above us as Tom and I stirred from our fitful sleep. The events of the previous day had left us both on edge, and neither of us had gotten much rest. As I sat up in my sleeping bag, rubbing the grit from my eyes, a chill ran down my spine. Something was wrong. "Tom," I whispered, nudging my brother awake. "Wake up. Something's not right." Tom groaned, rolling over to face me. "What is it now, Jake? Another ghost breathing down your neck?" But as he sat up and took in our surroundings, the sarcasm died on his lips. Our campsite, which we had meticulously set up the night before, was in complete disarray. Our backpacks had been torn open, their contents strewn across the forest floor. Deep claw marks scored the trees around us, and there was an acrid smell in the air, like ozone after a lightning strike. "What the hell happened?" Tom breathed, scrambling out of his sleeping bag. I shook my head, my heart racing. "I don't know. I didn't hear anything during the night. Did you?" Tom's face was pale as he surveyed the destruction. "No, nothing. How is that possible? We should have woken up if something was tearing apart our camp." We spent the next hour salvaging what we could of our supplies, all the while jumping at every sound from the surrounding forest. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "We need to get out of here," I said, stuffing the last of our salvageable gear into my damaged backpack. Whatever did this, it could still be nearby. Tom nodded, his earlier enthusiasm for the hunt completely gone. "Yeah, you're right. Let's head back to the ranger station. They need to know about this." We set off in what we thought was the direction we had come from, but as we walked, nothing looked familiar. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. I tried to use the sun to orient ourselves, but the dense canopy made it nearly impossible to get a clear view of the sky. After what felt like hours of walking, Tom suddenly stopped, holding up his hand. "Jake, look at this," he said, pointing to a nearby tree. I moved closer, my breath catching in my throat as I saw what had caught his attention. Strange markings were carved into the bark, unlike anything I had ever seen before. They seemed to shimmer slightly in the dappled sunlight, almost as if they were alive. "What do you think it means?" I asked, reaching out to touch the markings. Tom grabbed my wrist, pulling my hand back. "Don't touch it," he hissed. "We don't know what it is." As we stood there, staring at the bizarre symbols, a low growl echoed through the forest. We both froze, our eyes darting around, trying to locate the source of the sound. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my hand instinctively moving to the rifle slung over my shoulder. Tom nodded, his face grim. "Yeah, and it didn't sound like any animal I've ever heard before." The growl came again, louder this time, seeming to come from all directions at once. Without a word, we both broke into a run, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces. "There!" Tom shouted, pointing ahead. "I see a clearing!" We burst out of the trees only to skid to a halt at the edge of a steep cliff. The drop before us was easily 100 feet with jagged rocks at the bottom. The growling behind us grew louder, closer. "What now?" I panted, looking frantically for an escape route. Tom's eyes were wide with fear as he scanned the tree line. "I don't know. We're trapped." As we stood there, caught between the cliff and whatever was hunting us, I realized with a sickening clarity that we had become the prey. The roles had been reversed, and we were now at the mercy of something we couldn't even begin to understand. The trees at the edge of the clearing began to move, shimmering like a mirage in the desert heat. And then, emerging from the distortion, we saw it. The creature was like nothing I had ever seen before or could have imagined. It seemed to shift and change as it moved, sometimes appearing almost transparent, other times solid and terrifyingly real. "Oh my God," Tom whispered beside me. "What is that thing?" I couldn't answer. My mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. The creature was vaguely humanoid, but much larger, with long, razor-sharp claws and eyes that glowed with an otherworldly intelligence. It moved with a fluid grace that belied its size, stalking towards us with predatory intent. "We have to fight," I said, raising my rifle with shaking hands. "It's our only chance." Tom nodded, bringing his own weapon to bear. We opened fire simultaneously, the sound of our shots echoing off the cliff face behind us. But to our horror, the bullet seemed to pass right through the creature, as if it were made of smoke. The thing let out a roar that shook the very ground beneath our feet, and then it was on us. I felt a searing pain across my chest as its claws raked through my jacket, and I stumbled backwards, dangerously close to the cliff edge. "Jake!" Tom shouted, firing again and again at the creature. "Run! I'll hold it off!" But I couldn't leave him. Despite the pain and the terror, I raised my rifle again, aiming for what I hoped was the creature's head. As I pulled the trigger, the thing turned towards me, its glowing eyes locking onto mine. In that moment, I felt a presence in my mind, alien and cold, sifting through my thoughts like they were open books, and then as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature vanished. One moment it was there, poised to strike, and the next it was gone, leaving behind only the acrid smell of ozone. Tom and I stood there panting and shell-shocked for what felt like an eternity. Finally, my brother broke the silence. What just happened?" he asked, his voice shaking. I shook my head, wincing at the pain from my wounds. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here. Now." We made our way back into the forest, moving as quickly and quietly as we could. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves had us on edge. We no longer had any idea which direction would lead us back to civilization, but we knew we couldn't stay where we were. As we walked, I noticed more of the strange markings on the trees. They seemed to be everywhere now, glowing faintly in the dim light of the forest. "Tom," I said, pointing them out, "do you think these are some kind of territory markers?" My brother studied the symbols, his brow furrowed. Maybe. Or they could be a warning. Either way, I don't think we're welcome here anymore. We pressed on, the forest growing darker and more oppressive with each step. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches reaching out like grasping hands. More than once, I could have sworn I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, only to find nothing when I turned to look. As night began to fall, we knew we had to find shelter. We couldn't risk another night in the open, not with that thing out there hunting us. After what felt like hours of searching, we found a small cave set into the side of a hill. It's not ideal, Tom said as we inspected the entrance, but it's defensible. We can take turns keeping watch. I nodded, too exhausted to argue. We gathered what wood we could find and built a small fire just inside the cave entrance. As we huddled around its meager warmth, eating the last of our rations, I couldn't help but voice the fear that had been growing in my mind. Tom, I said quietly, what if we can't find our way out of here? What if that thing is just toying with us? My brother was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with a determination I hadn't seen since this nightmare began. We're going to make it out, Jake, he said firmly. Whatever that thing is, however it's messing with us, we're going to beat it. We just need to stay smart, stay together, and keep fighting. And as I settled in for my watch, Tom's words echoing in my mind, I realized that our ordeal was far from over. We had entered these woods as hunters, confident in our skills and our knowledge of the wilderness. But now, lost in a forest that seemed to defy the laws of nature, hunted by a creature that shouldn't exist, we had become something else entirely. We were survivors, and the real test was only just beginning. The forest seemed to breathe around us as Tom and I stumbled through the undergrowth, our legs aching from hours of aimless wandering. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that played tricks on our already frayed nerves. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had us whirling around, rifles at the ready. We need to find shelter, I panted, wiping sweat from my brow. We can't be out in the open when night falls. Tom nodded grimly, his eyes scanning the darkening woods. Agreed, but where? This forest goes on forever. As if in answer to our prayers, a break in the trees revealed a small clearing ahead, and there, nestled against a rocky outcropping, stood an old cabin. Its weathered logs and sagging roof spoke of years of neglect, but to our exhausted eyes it looked like a five-star hotel. Thank God, Tom breathed, relief evident in his voice. Let's check it out. We approached cautiously, years of hunting having taught us to never take anything at face value. The cabin's door hung askew on rusted hinges, creaking ominously as Tom pushed it open with the barrel of his rifle. "Hello?" he called out. "Anyone home?" Silence greeted us, broken only by the sound of our own ragged breathing. We stepped inside, our eyes slowly adjusting to the gloom. The interior was sparse, a small wood stove in one corner, a rickety table with 2 chairs and a narrow cot against the far wall. A thick layer of dust covered everything, undisturbed for what looked like years. "Looks like we're in luck," I said, lowering my rifle. "No one's been here in a long time." Tom nodded, already moving to secure the door behind us. "We should be safe here for the night. Let's see what we can find to fortify this place." As we set about barricading the windows and gathering what meager supplies we could find, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. The cabin felt off somehow. Not dangerous exactly, but significant in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't until I was checking the cot for anything we could use that I found it. Tucked beneath the threadbare mattress was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. "Tom," I called, holding up my discovery. "Look at this." My brother came over, curiosity piqued. "What is it?" "Some kind of journal," I replied, carefully opening the fragile cover. "Looks old." As we pored over the pages by the light of our flashlights, a chill ran down my spine. The journal belonged to a man named William Erickson, a wildlife biologist who had come to these woods nearly 30 years ago to study the local fauna. But what he found was something far beyond the realm of known science. "Listen to this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper as I read aloud. Day 47. The creature appeared again today. It moves like smoke on the wind, there one moment and gone the next. I've never seen anything like it. It seems to defy the very laws of nature. The locals speak of it in hushed tones, calling it the Shadow Walker. I fear I may be in over my head. Tom's face had gone pale. "Jake, this has to be what we've been seeing, the thing that's been hunting us." I nodded, turning the page. "There's more. Look at this." Sketched on the next page was a crude drawing of a creature that matched what we had seen in the clearing. Humanoid, but wrong somehow, with elongated limbs and eyes that seemed to glow even on the paper. "My God," Tom breathed. He saw it too. We're not crazy. As we continued to read, the journal painted a terrifying picture. Erickson had spent months tracking the creature, studying its habits, trying to understand what it was and where it came from. But the more he learned, the more dangerous his situation became. Day 103, I read, my hands shaking slightly. "The Shadow Walker is aware of me now. It's been leaving signs, strange markings on the trees, mutilated animals left outside my cabin. I think it's trying to communicate, but I can't decipher its message. I fear I may have crossed a line. This is no longer just research, it's become a game of survival." Tom paced the small cabin, running his hands through his hair. "This is insane, Jake. We need to get out of here. We need to tell someone about this." I was about to agree when a sound from above made us both freeze. Something was moving on the roof, its weight causing the old timbers to creak and groan. "It found us," I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. Tom was already moving, grabbing his rifle and shoving the table against the door. "We need to barricade ourselves in. Now." We worked feverishly, pushing what little furniture we had against the door and windows. The sounds from above grew louder, more insistent. Whatever was up there, it wanted in. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice tight with fear as we huddled in the center of the cabin, weapons at the ready. Tom's face was a mask of determination. "We fight. We've got nowhere else to go." As if in response to his words, the noise suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was somehow even more terrifying than the commotion had been. We stood there barely breathing, straining our ears for any sign of the creature's presence. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours, and then, just as the tension was becoming unbearable, everything went quiet. The oppressive silence that had fallen over the cabin lifted, replaced by the normal sounds of the forest at night. Is it gone?" I whispered, not daring to move. Tom shook his head, his eyes never leaving the door. "I don't know, but we can't let our guard down." We took turns keeping watch through the night, jumping at every sound, every shadow. I found myself returning to Erickson's journal again and again, searching for any clue that might help us survive. As dawn broke, painting the cabin in pale light, we cautiously ventured outside. What we found made my blood run cold. All around the cabin, in a perfect circle, were those strange, shimmering markings we had seen on the trees. And there, right on our doorstep, was a freshly killed deer, its body twisted in ways that defied natural explanation. "It's communicating," Tom said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and terror. "Just like Erickson wrote. But what is it trying to say?" I shook my head, unable to tear my eyes away from the grisly scene. "I don't know. But I think we're in way over our heads here, Tom. This isn't just some undiscovered animal. This is something else." As we stood there, trying to process what we were seeing, a realization hit me. "The journal," I said suddenly. "Erickson must have figured something out. Why else would the creature have left it for us to find?" Tom's eyes widened. "You think it wanted us to read it? But why?" "I don't know," I admitted. But I think if we're going to survive this, we need to finish what Erickson started. We need to understand what this thing is and what it wants. My brother nodded slowly, his earlier panic replaced by a grim determination. All right, but we do this smart. No more running blindly through the woods. We study, we prepare, and then we face this thing on our terms. As we headed back into the cabin to pore over Erickson's notes, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had crossed a threshold. We were no longer just lost hunters trying to find our way home. We had become part of something much bigger, a mystery that had claimed at least one life already. The Shadow Walker, whatever it was, had chosen us for some inscrutable purpose. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, illuminating the bizarre scene around the cabin, I knew that our real journey was only just beginning. We had come to these woods seeking adventure, a break from our mundane lives. Now, faced with a reality that defied explanation, I found myself longing for the simplicity we had left behind. But there was no going back. The only way out was through, and the path ahead was shrouded in shadows. As Tom and I settled in to study Erickson's journal, the weight of our situation pressed down on us. We were no longer the hunters. We had become something else entirely. Investigators, perhaps, or unwilling participants in a cosmic game we didn't understand. Whatever lay ahead, one thing was certain. Our lives would never be the same again. The cabin creaked and groaned around us as Tom and I pored over Erickson's journal for what felt like the 100th time. Outside, the forest had grown dark, the shadows long and menacing. We had spent the entire day studying the biologist's notes, trying to piece together a plan. "Okay, let's go over this one more time," Tom said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Erickson believed the creature was drawn to strong emotions, especially fear. He theorized that it fed on some kind of psychic energy. I nodded, flipping through the worn pages. Right. And he thought that if he could control his fear, maybe even project a sense of calm, he might be able to communicate with it. Tom stood up, pacing the small confines of the cabin. "So what are you suggesting? We just sit here and think happy thoughts while that thing hunts us?" "No," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I'm suggesting we set a trap. We use ourselves as bait." My brother stopped pacing, turning to stare at me incredulously. "Are you insane? That thing nearly killed us yesterday." I know, I said, holding up my hands, but hear me out. Erickson never got the chance to test his theory. We have that chance. If we can lure it in, control our fear, maybe we can establish some kind of, connection?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, considering. Finally, he sighed. "It's crazy, but then again, this whole situation is crazy. What's your plan?" I laid out the idea that had been forming in my mind. We would set up in the clearing just outside the cabin, using ourselves as bait. We'd build a fire, try to project an aura of calm, and wait for the creature to approach. "And if it decides to rip us to shreds instead of chat?" Tom asked, his tone skeptical. I patted the rifle leaning against my chair. "Then we fight, but this time we'll be prepared." As night fell, we put our plan into action. We gathered what supplies we could from the cabin, some old rope, a few cans of food that were probably older than us, and most importantly, Erickson's journal. Then we set up in the clearing, building a small fire and arranging ourselves on either side of it. "Remember," I said as we settled in, "no matter what happens, we need to stay calm. Control your fear." Tom nodded, his face a mask of concentration. "Right, calm, in the face of a reality-bending monster. No problem." As the hours ticked by, the forest around us seemed to come alive with sound. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig had us on edge. But we forced ourselves to remain still, to breathe deeply, to project an aura of tranquility we didn't feel. It was nearing midnight when something changed. The normal sounds of the forest, the chirping of crickets, the hoot of a distant owl, suddenly ceased. An unnatural silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the crackling of our fire. "Jake," Tom whispered, his eyes wide, "I think it's here." I nodded, my heart pounding despite my efforts to stay calm. Remember the plan. Stay calm. Let it come to us. The air around us seemed to thicken, shimmering like a heat haze. And then emerging from the darkness beyond our fire, we saw it. The creature moved like smoke given form, its outline shifting and changing as it approached. Those glowing eyes, so alien and yet so intelligent, fixed upon us. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to fight, to do something. But I forced myself to remain still, to meet that otherworldly gaze. Beside me, I could hear Tom's ragged breathing as he struggled to do the same. The creature paused at the edge of our firelight, its head tilting in what seemed like curiosity. For a moment, nothing moved. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. And then, suddenly, our fire went out. One moment it was burning brightly, the next we were plunged into total darkness. "Jake?" Tom's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "What's happening?" Before I could respond, I felt something brush against me. It was like ice sliding across my skin, leaving a trail of goosebumps in its wake. I swung wildly, my fist connecting with nothing but air. "Tom!" I shouted, my carefully maintained calm evaporating. "Where are you?" A flash of lightning illuminated the clearing for a brief, terrifying moment. In that instant, I saw the creature, far closer than I had realized. Its semi-transparent form was lunging towards Tom, claws extended. "No!" I screamed, throwing myself towards my brother. But I was too slow, too far away. The lightning faded, plunging us back into darkness. I heard Tom cry out in pain, the sound cutting off abruptly. Panic surged through me as I scrambled in the direction I had last seen him. "Tom, answer me." My hands found something solid, Tom's jacket. I pulled him close, frantically checking for injuries. He was breathing, but unconscious. I could feel something warm and sticky on his chest. Blood. The creature's presence was all around us now. I could feel its cold aura, hear its otherworldly breathing. Our trap had failed spectacularly. We were now at the mercy of something we couldn't begin to understand. "Please," I found myself saying, my voice breaking. "We didn't mean any harm, we just wanted to understand." To my shock, I felt a response. Not in words, but in impressions, images that flashed through my mind. I saw vast, empty spaces between the stars. I felt in loneliness so profound it made my heart ache. And underneath it all, a burning curiosity, a desire to connect. The creature was trying to communicate. Forcing myself to calm down, I focused on those impressions, trying to form a response of my own. I thought of our world, of the forests and mountains, of the bonds between people. I projected images of Tom and me, of our journey, our fear, but also our fascination. The oppressive aura around us seemed to lessen slightly. I felt a sense of understanding, acknowledgement. It was hard to interpret these alien emotions. Slowly, cautiously, I reached out a hand into the darkness. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I felt something. Not the cold, smoke-like substance of before, but something more solid, almost warm. Another flash of lightning illuminated the clearing. The creature was there, its form more defined now. Less smoke and more something else. Its hand, if you could call it that, was touching mine. Its eyes, still glowing but somehow less terrifying, met my gaze. In that moment I understood. This being, this shadow walker, as Erickson had called it, was just as curious about us as we were about it. It had been trying to communicate all along, but its methods were so alien, so terrifying to our human perceptions that we had only seen a monster. The lightning faded, but this time the darkness didn't seem so absolute. A soft, pulsing glow emanated from the creature, providing just enough light to see by. I looked down at Tom, relief washing over me as I saw his chest rising and falling steadily. The blood I had felt earlier seemed to be gone. Had the creature healed him? "Jake?" Tom's voice was weak but alert. What happened? What's going on?" I helped him sit up, keeping one eye on the creature that still stood nearby. It's okay, Tom. I think we're okay. It's not here to hurt us. Tom's eyes widened as he took in the scene. The softly glowing being. The strange calm that had fallen over the clearing. You mean, it worked? We actually made contact? I nodded, a slightly hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. Yeah, I think we did, though not quite in the way we planned. The creature, no, the being, moved closer. This time, neither of us flinched away. It reached out, touching each of us gently on the forehead. A flood of images and sensations poured into my mind. I saw glimpses of other worlds, of journeys across vast gulfs of space and time. I felt the being's loneliness, its joy at finally finding someone to connect with. When it withdrew its touch, I felt changed. The forest around us seemed more alive, more vibrant. I could sense things I had never been aware of before. The slow, patient life of the trees, the complex web of energy that connected everything. Tom, I said, my voice filled with awe. I think we've just become part of something much bigger than we ever imagined. My brother nodded, his expression mirroring my own sense of wonder. What do we do now? I looked at the being, which was watching us with what I now recognized as friendly curiosity. I think, I said slowly, that we have a lot to learn, and a lot to teach. As the night wore on, we sat in that clearing, no longer predator and prey, but three beings from vastly different worlds, finding common ground in our shared curiosity. Our hunt had turned into something far more profound, a first contact, a bridge between realities, and as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, I knew that our real adventure was only just beginning. The forest was eerily quiet as Tom and I made our way through the dense undergrowth. The encounter with the otherworldly being had left us shaken but also filled with a sense of wonder and purpose. We had decided to try and find our way back to civilization, to share our discovery with the world. But the woods seemed to have other plans. "Jake," Tom called out, his voice tinged with frustration. "I think we've passed this tree before." I stopped, looking around at the seemingly endless sea of pines. He was right. There was something familiar about our surroundings, though in this forest everything started to look the same after a while. "Maybe we should take a break," I suggested. "Try to get our bearings." Tom nodded, slumping down against a fallen log. I joined him, pulling out our dwindling supply of water and taking a small sip before passing it to him. "What do you think it meant?" Tom asked after a moment of silence. "All those images it showed us?" I shook my head, still trying to process the flood of information we'd received. "I'm not sure. It was like seeing the universe through alien eyes. So much of it didn't make sense, but some of it did," Tom insisted. "I saw, I don't know, other worlds, other beings like it, and I felt loneliness," I finished for him, "and loneliness so profound it hurt." We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. The forest around us seemed to pulse with a new energy, or maybe we were just more aware of it now. Either way, it was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Suddenly, a twig snapped somewhere in the distance. We both jerked to attention, our nerves still on edge from our previous encounters. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the trees. "Is someone there?" No response came, but I could have sworn I heard movement, like something large moving through the underbrush. "Maybe it's back," Tom whispered, a mix of fear and excitement in his voice. I stood up slowly, scanning our surroundings. "Hello?" I called again. "We're not afraid. We want to understand." This time, I definitely heard something. It sounded like my own voice, echoing back at me from multiple directions. "Jake," Tom said, his face pale. "I don't think that's an echo." Before I could respond, we heard another sound. My voice again, but this time saying words I hadn't spoken. "Help." Me. It was eerie, hearing my own voice pleading for help from the depths of the forest. Tom and I exchanged a glance, both of us unsure of what to do. "It could be a trap," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Tom nodded, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. "But what if it's not? What if it's trying to communicate again?" I was about to argue when we heard it again, this time louder and more desperate. "Please, help me." "We have to check it out," Tom said, already moving in the direction of the voice. "Tom, wait," I called, but he was already pushing through the undergrowth. I cursed under my breath and followed him. The forest seemed to close in around us as we moved deeper, the trees growing denser, blocking out more and more of the sunlight. The voice, my voice, continued to call out, growing more frantic with each repetition. Suddenly we burst into a small clearing. What we saw there made my blood run cold. The ground was littered with bones, animal bones, human bones, some bleached white with age, others disturbingly fresh. "Oh God," Tom breathed, his face ashen. I was about to suggest we leave when I heard it again, my voice, coming from the other side of the clearing. "Jake, help me." Tom started forward, but I grabbed his arm. "Tom, no, this isn't right." He shook me off. "We can't just leave. What if it's hurt?" Before I could stop him, he was moving across the clearing. I followed, my heart pounding in my chest. As we neared the other side, the undergrowth seemed to part, revealing nothing. "What the—" Tom started to say, but he was cut off by a blood-curdling scream. His scream. I whirled around just in time to see Tom being dragged into the forest by something I couldn't quite see, a shimmer in the air, like heat haze given form. "Tom!" I yelled, lunging for him, but my hands closed on empty air. In the blink of an eye, he was gone. "Tom!" I screamed again, crashing through the underbrush in the direction he had disappeared. "Tom, where are you?" I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I could hear something moving ahead of me, just out of sight. Tom's voice echoed through the trees, calling my name, begging for help. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. The forest seemed to shift and change around me, paths appearing and disappearing, landmarks rearranging themselves. Every time I thought I was getting close, the sounds would shift, coming from a different direction. Finally, exhausted and disoriented, I stumbled into another clearing. This one was different, a perfect circle of trees surrounding a small, still pond. And there, lying on the ground at the water's edge, was Tom's backpack. My heart in my throat, I approached slowly, half expecting something to leap out at me. But nothing happened. The clearing was silent, save for my own ragged breathing. I picked up the backpack with trembling hands. It was definitely Tom's. I recognized the worn patches, the places where he'd sewn up tears from our previous adventures. But how had it gotten here? "Tom?" I called out, my voice hoarse from shouting. "Tom, can you hear me?" The only response was the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. I sank to my knees, clutching the backpack to my chest. What had happened? Where was my brother? As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt a wave of despair wash over me. I was alone in this impossible forest, separated from the only person I trusted, hunted by things I couldn't understand. But as I sat there, on the verge of giving up, I remembered the connection we had made with the being, the loneliness it had felt, the desire to communicate. What if this was another attempt? What if somehow this was all part of trying to understand us? With a newfound determination, I stood up, slinging Tom's backpack over my shoulder alongside my own. "I don't know if you can hear me," I said to the forest at large, "but I'm not giving up. I'm going to find my brother. And then we're going to figure this out together." As if in response, I felt a change in the air. The oppressive silence lifted, replaced by the normal sounds of the forest, birds chirping, leaves rustling. And there, just at the edge of hearing, I thought I caught the sound of Tom's voice. "I'm coming, Tom," I whispered. "Just hold on." With renewed purpose, I set off into the forest once more. I didn't know what challenges lay ahead, What strange encounters awaited me. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to rest until I found my brother and unraveled the mystery of this impossible forest. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not with malevolence, but with curiosity. Whatever force was at work here, be it the being we had encountered or something else entirely, it was observing, learning, trying to understand. And in that moment, I realized that's exactly what I needed to do as well. Understand. Not just find Tom, not just survive, but truly comprehend the nature of this place and the entities that called it home. "All right," I said to the watchful forest. "You want to learn about us? Then let's learn about each other. But first, I need to find my brother. Help me do that, and I promise we'll stay. We'll communicate. We'll understand." As if in answer, a path seemed to open up before me, winding its way through the trees. Whether it led to Tom or to some new challenge, I couldn't know. But it was a start. Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the path, ready to face whatever this strange, wonderful, terrifying forest had in store for me. I couldn't tell how long I had been unconscious. The last thing I remembered was the searing pain in my side, and the world spinning into darkness. As I slowly came to, I became aware of a damp, musty smell, and the feel of rough stone beneath me. My eyes fluttered open, struggling to adjust to the dim light. I was in some sort of cave, the walls glistening with moisture. A small fire flickered nearby, casting dancing shadows on the rocky surfaces. "Ah, you're finally awake," a gruff voice said, startling me. I tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in my side. An old man came into view, his face weathered and lined, a wild gray beard cascading down his chest. He wore tattered clothes that looked like they had seen better days a decade ago. "Easy there, son," he said, gently pushing me back down. "That was a nasty wound you had. You're lucky I found you when I did." I blinked, trying to process everything. Who are you? Where am I?" The old man chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Name's Gus. As for where you are, well, that's a bit more complicated. You're underground in my home. As for where that is in relation to the world above, that changes." I shook my head, wincing again at the movement. "What do you mean it changes? And how did I get here?" "The last thing I remember. You were attacked," Gus finished for me. "By the Shimmer, I reckon. Nasty piece of work, that one. Been causing trouble in these woods for longer than I can remember." My mind raced, trying to piece everything together. "The Shimmer? Is that what took my brother?" Gus's bushy eyebrows rose. "Your brother? There was another one of you out there?" I nodded, the memory of Tom's disappearance sending a fresh wave of panic through me. "Yes, my brother Tom, we were separated. Something took him. I was trying to find him when I trailed off, the events leading to my injury still hazy." Gus stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Well, if the Shimmer has him, he's not dead. Not yet, anyway. It likes to play with its food, so to speak." "We have to find him," I exclaimed, trying once again to sit up. This time Gus didn't stop me, though he did steady me when a wave of dizziness hit. "Whoa there, cowboy," he said. "You're in no shape to be going anywhere just yet. Besides, you go rushing out there half-cocked, you'll end up right back in the Shimmer's clutches. Or worse." I slumped back against the cave wall, frustration and fear warring inside me. Then what am I supposed to do? I can't just leave Tom out there. Gus sighed, settling himself on a makeshift stool near the fire. "I suppose I ought to tell you what you're really up against. Might help you understand why you can't just go charging off into the woods." Over the next hour, Gus spun a tale that, had I not experienced the impossible things I had over the past few days, I would have dismissed as the ravings of a madman. He spoke of the forest as a living entity, constantly shifting and changing. The Shimmer, he explained, was both a part of the forest and separate from it, a predator that fed on fear and confusion. But that's not all. Gus said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The shimmer, it's not from here. Not from our world, I mean. It's something else. Something alien. I felt a chill run down my spine, remembering the strange, otherworldly presence we had encountered. We made contact with something. Tom and I. It showed us things, impossible things. Was that? Gus nodded gravely. Likely so. The shimmer, it's curious about us. Wants to understand. But its way of learning, well, it ain't exactly gentle. How do you know all this? I asked, my head spinning with the implications of what he was telling me. Gus's eyes took on a faraway look. Been here a long time, son. Longer than I care to remember. You see enough, you start to put the pieces together. Plus, he added with a wry smile, I've had my own encounters with the thing. I leaned forward, ignoring the twinge in my side. Then you must know how to find it, how to get Tom back. Gus held up a hand. Now hold on. It ain't that simple. The shimmer, it don't play by our rules. You can't just track it down like some ordinary critter. But, he added, seeing the despair on my face, there might be a way to negotiate with it. Hope flared in my chest. How? I'll do anything. Gus got to his feet with a groan, his joints popping audibly. He shuffled over to a dark corner of the cave and returned with a small wooden box. Opening it carefully, he revealed a strange-looking plant. Its leaves seemed to shimmer and shift, much like the creature we had encountered. This here, Gus said, is the key. It's called shimmerweed. Only thing I've ever found that seems to affect the creature. Problem is, it's rare as hen's teeth and twice as hard to find. I stared at the plant, hope and determination rising within me. Where can we find more? Gus chuckled. We? Son, I'm too old for that kind of adventure, but you might have a chance. There's a valley, about a day's journey from here. That's where I found this specimen, might be more there. I was already getting to my feet, ignoring the pain. Then that's where I'm going. Just point me in the right direction. Gus shook his head, but I could see a glimmer of admiration in his eyes. You're either the bravest or the most foolish young man I've ever met. Probably both. All right, I'll tell you how to find the valley. But first, we need to get some food in you and make sure that wound is properly tended. As Gus busied himself preparing a meal of some kind of stew, I found myself lost in thought. The idea that we were dealing with something truly alien, something beyond our understanding, was terrifying. But it also filled me with a strange sense of excitement. If we could communicate with it, truly understand it. What are you thinking about with that far-off look? Gus asked, breaking into my thoughts as he handed me a bowl of stew. I took a bite, surprised at how good it tasted. I was just thinking, if the shimmer is really trying to understand us, maybe we can use that. Maybe there's a way to communicate, to reach an understanding. Gus raised an eyebrow. That's a dangerous line of thinking, son. The shimmer ain't human. Its idea of understanding might be tearing you apart to see how you work. I shook my head. But we made contact before. It showed us things, tried to communicate. There has to be a way. Gus was quiet for a long moment, studying me intently. Finally, he sighed. You remind me of myself years ago, full of curiosity, willing to risk everything for knowledge. Just remember, curiosity killed the cat. But satisfaction brought it back. I finished with a small smile. Gus laughed, a full-bellied sound that echoed through the cave. Fair enough. All right, let's get you patched up and ready for your journey. You've got a long road ahead of you and a brother to save. As we spent the next few hours preparing, Gus showing me how to make a salve for my wound, packing supplies, and drawing a rough map to the valley, I couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and anticipation. I was walking into the unknown, facing something beyond human comprehension, but I was also on the verge of a discovery that could change everything. Just as we were finishing our preparations, a low, rumbling sound echoed through the cave. Gus's face paled. It's found us, he whispered. The shimmer. It's here. Panic gripped me. What do we do? Gus was already moving, pushing me towards a narrow tunnel at the back of the cave. You go. Now. Follow this tunnel. It'll lead you towards the valley. Don't stop. Don't look back. But what about you? I protested. Gus gave me a sad smile. I've lived a long life, son. Made my peace with this place. You've got a brother to save and a mystery to solve. Go. Make it count. Before I could argue further, he shoved me into the tunnel and rolled a large rock in front of the entrance. The last thing I heard before darkness enveloped me was Gus's voice, strong and defiant, addressing the shimmer. All right, you otherworldly bastard, let's dance. With tears in my eyes and determination in my heart, I turned and began my journey through the dark tunnel. Gus's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. I would find the shimmer weed, save Tom, and uncover the truth behind this impossible forest. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of something monumental. Whatever lay ahead, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, a winding path through the earth that left me disoriented and breathless. I couldn't shake the image of Gus facing down the shimmer, sacrificing himself to give me a chance. His last words echoed in my mind, spurring me forward despite my exhaustion and the lingering pain in my side. After what felt like hours, I saw a glimmer of light ahead. Hope surged through me as I quickened my pace, emerging from the tunnel into a lush, secluded valley. The sight that greeted me was breathtaking, a vibrant ecosystem unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Plants of impossible colors and shapes dotted the landscape, and the air was thick with the calls of unseen creatures. Wow, I breathed, taking in the alien beauty of the place. Gus, I wish you could see this. As I stepped further into the valley, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not by the shimmer, but by the valley itself. Every plant seemed to turn towards me as I passed. Every rustle in the undergrowth felt deliberate. I pulled out the crude map Gus had drawn for me, trying to orient myself. According to his instructions, the shimmer weed should be growing near the center of the valley, close to a small pond. I set off in what I hoped was the right direction, my senses on high alert. As I walked, I couldn't help but marvel at the strange flora surrounding me. There were flowers that seemed to glow from within, trees with bark that shifted colors like a chameleon, and vines that appeared to move of their own accord. It was beautiful, but also deeply unsettling. Focus, Jake, I muttered to myself. Find the plant, save Tom, figure out the rest later. After about an hour of cautious hiking, I finally spotted what I was looking for. There, in a small clearing ahead, was a patch of plants that matched Gus's description of the shimmerweed. Their leaves shimmered and shifted, much like the creature we had encountered in the forest. My heart leaped with excitement and relief. Yes, finally some good luck. But as I moved towards the clearing, my elation quickly turned to dread. Surrounding the precious plants was a pack of wolves. At least, they looked like wolves at first glance. As I watched, their forms seemed to ripple and change, sometimes appearing more bear-like, other times taking on characteristics I couldn't even name. Of course, I sighed, ducking behind a large, oddly shaped tree. It couldn't be that easy, could it? I assessed my situation. There were at least 5 of the wolf things guarding the shimmerweed. They seemed alert but not agitated. Perhaps they hadn't noticed me yet. I had my hunting rifle, but the thought of using it made me uneasy. These creatures, strange as they were part of this valley's ecosystem. Plus, I had no idea how they'd react to a gunshot. Think, Jake, I whispered to myself. What would Tom do? Tom had always been the clever one, able to think his way out of any situation. As I pondered my options, an idea began to form. It was risky, but it just might work. I reached into my pack and pulled out the food Gus had given me for the journey, some kind of jerky made from meat I didn't want to identify. The smell was pungent, and I hoped it would be enticing to the wolf creatures. Carefully, I tore the jerky into small pieces and began to make my way around the clearing, staying hidden in the dense foliage. Every few steps, I would toss a piece of jerky as far as I could in the opposite direction of the shimmerweed. At first, the wolf things didn't seem to notice, but then one of them lifted its head, nose twitching. It let out a low growl that sounded like no wolf I'd ever heard, more like the creaking of old trees mixed with a cat's purr. The others quickly took notice, and soon they were all moving towards the scent of the meat. "That's it," I murmured encouragingly. "Just a little further." As the last of the creatures loped off into the undergrowth, I made my move. I sprinted towards the patch of shimmerweed, my heart pounding in my ears. As I reached the plants, I could hear the wolf things howling in the distance, realizing they'd been tricked. I dropped to my knees and began to carefully harvest the plants, making sure to get the roots as Gus had instructed. The leaves felt strange under my fingers, almost alive, and for a moment I could have sworn I heard whispers coming from the plants themselves. Just as I was stuffing the last of the shimmerweed into my pack, a low growl froze me in place. Slowly, I turned to see one of the wolf creatures standing at the edge of the clearing. Its form was shifting rapidly now, as if it couldn't decide what shape to take. "Nice doggy," I said, trying to keep my voice calm as I slowly stood up. "Good. Whatever you are, I'm just going to leave now, okay?" The creature took a step forward, its eyes, now glowing an eerie blue, fixed on me. I backed away, my hand inching towards my rifle, but before either of us could make another move, the air between us began to shimmer and distort. My breath caught in my throat as a familiar form began to take shape. The shimmer, the entity that had been haunting these woods, materialized before me. It was just as otherworldly and terrifying as I remembered, its semi-transparent body constantly shifting and changing. For a long moment, nothing moved. The wolf creature whined and backed away, clearly as unnerved by the shimmer's presence as I was. I stood frozen, unsure whether to run or try to communicate. Then, to my utter shock, the shimmer spoke. Not in words exactly, but in a series of images and sensations that flooded my mind. Curiosity, interest. "Why are you here?" I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet its gaze. I came for the plant, to save my brother. You took him. I want him back." More images flashed through my mind. Brother, connection, interesting. Why risk for other? "Because he's family," I said, surprised at the steadiness in my voice. "We look out for each other. It's what humans do." The shimmer seemed to consider this. Its form rippled, and for a moment I thought I saw something almost human in its shifting features. Loneliness, isolation, no others like us. A wave of empathy washed over me, surprising in its intensity. "You're alone here? Is that why you took Tom, to understand us?" Affirmation, curiosity, humans fascinating, complex, want to learn. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to propose. What if we could teach you, communicate with you? Would you let my brother go?" The shimmer's form pulsed, and I felt a surge of excitement that wasn't my own. Possibility, interest. But how? I held up the shimmerweed. "This plant, it's connected to you somehow, isn't it? That's why it affects you. Maybe we could use it to bridge the gap between us, to really communicate." For what felt like an eternity, the shimmer was silent. Then, slowly, it extended what might have been a hand towards me. Agreement, curiosity. "Show us." With trembling fingers, I reached out and touched the shimmer's appendage. The moment we made contact, the world exploded into a kaleidoscope of sensation. I saw glimpses of other worlds, felt the vast loneliness of interstellar travel, experienced the wonder of discovering a new planet teeming with life, and through it all, I felt the shimmer's burning curiosity, its desperate desire to understand and connect. When the visions faded, I found myself on my knees, gasping for breath. The shimmer loomed over me, its form more stable now, almost solid. Understanding, Gratitude. We'll release, brother. But stay. Teach. Learn. I nodded, still reeling from the intensity of the connection. Yes. Yes, we'll stay. We'll teach you about us and learn about you. But first, please take me to Tom. The shimmer's form rippled in what I somehow knew was agreement. It gestured towards the forest, and I felt a tug in my mind, guiding me. As I followed the shimmer back into the woods, the wolf creature trailing behind us like a curious puppy, I couldn't help but marvel at the turn of events. We had come to these woods looking for a simple hunting trip, and instead found ourselves on the brink of first contact with an alien intelligence. The forest seemed different now, less menacing and more alive. I could feel the pulse of life all around me, the complex web of connections between every plant and animal. And at the center of it all, the shimmer, a being of incredible power and equally incredible loneliness. Tom's not going to believe this, I muttered to myself, a smile tugging at my lips despite the gravity of the situation. As we walked, the shimmer continued to communicate with me in its unique way, sharing glimpses of its history and purpose. I learned that it had come to Earth centuries ago, drawn by the rich biodiversity of our planet. But the complexity of human consciousness had confused and fascinated it, leading to its attempts to study us. Attempts that, from our perspective, had seemed predatory and terrifying. We have so much to learn from each other, I said aloud, earning a pulse of agreement from the shimmer. Finally, we reached a clearing that seemed to shimmer and shift, much like the shimmer itself. And there, in the center, looking dazed but unharmed, was Tom. "Jake!" he cried out when he saw me, relief evident in his voice. "What's going on? How did you find me?" I rushed to him, pulling him into a tight hug. "It's a long story, bro. But we're safe now, and we've got one hell of an adventure ahead of us." As I began to explain everything to a wide-eyed Tom, the shimmer watched us with what I could only describe as fond curiosity. The wolf creature had settled nearby, its form now stable, looking like a cross between a wolf and something out of a fantasy novel. I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. We had a lot to learn, a lot to teach, and undoubtedly many challenges to face. But as I stood there with my brother, in the presence of an alien intelligence that wanted to understand us, I felt a sense of purpose and excitement I had never known before. Our hunting trip had turned into something far greater, a chance to bridge the gap between worlds, to foster understanding between vastly different forms of life. And as the sun began to set over the impossible forest, painting the sky in colors I had never seen before, I knew that our real adventure was only just beginning. Armed with the shimmer weed and a newfound understanding of the entity we'd been dealing with, I made my way through the ever-shifting forest. The plant's leaves pulsed with an otherworldly glow in my pack, seeming to resonate with the strange energies surrounding us. My heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and fear as I approached what I hoped was the shimmer's lair. The forest had grown denser, the trees twisted into impossible shapes that defied natural law. The air felt thick, charged with an energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from every direction. "I know you're out there," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm not here to fight. I want to talk." A rustling in the undergrowth made me spin around, my hand instinctively reaching for the shimmer weed. But it was just a small, iridescent creature that looked like a cross between a rabbit and a lizard. It regarded me with curious, multifaceted eyes before scurrying away. I pressed on, following the pull I felt towards what I hoped was the heart of the shimmer's domain. As I walked, I couldn't help but marvel at the alien beauty of my surroundings. Flowers that seemed to sing in frequencies just beyond human hearing, trees with bark that rippled like water. It was a biologist's dream, and nightmare rolled into one. Finally, I emerged into a large clearing. At its center stood a structure that defied description, part cave, part living organism, its walls pulsing with the same ethereal light as the shimmerweed. And there, just inside the entrance, I saw a sight that made my heart leap. Tom, alive but unconscious, along with several other people I didn't recognize. "Tom!" I called out, rushing forward. But before I could reach him, the air in front of me shimmered and distorted. The shimmer materialized, its form more solid and defined than I'd ever seen it. It stood between me and the captives, its alien features unreadable. "Let them go," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm here now. We can communicate. There's no need for this anymore." The shimmer's response came not in words, but in a flood of images and sensations that filled my mind. Curiosity, fascination, humans complex, need to understand. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I get it. We're fascinating to you, but this isn't the way. You're hurting people. Let me show you another way to understand us." I reached into my pack, slowly pulling out the shimmer weed. The plant seemed to come alive in my hands, its glow intensifying. The shimmer reacted immediately, its form rippling with what I sensed was a mixture of recognition and wariness. Danger. Power. How? "It's connected to you somehow, isn't it?" I asked, holding the plant out. "I think it can help us communicate better. Let me show you." I took a step forward, but the shimmer lashed out, a tendril of its ethereal form whipping towards me. I barely managed to dodge, the alien appendage grazing my cheek and leaving a trail of icy numbness. "Stop," I shouted, stumbling backward. "I'm not here to hurt you." But the shimmer was beyond reasoning now. It advanced on me, its form shifting and growing more monstrous with each step. I could feel its confusion, its fear, and underneath it all, a desperate loneliness that threatened to overwhelm me. I clutched the shimmer weed tightly, its glow pulsing in time with my racing heart. As the entity lunged at me again, I did the only thing I could think of. I threw the plant directly at it. The effect was immediate and shocking. The moment the shimmer weed made contact, the entity recoiled as if in pain. Its form began to writhe and contort, the clearing filling with a high-pitched keening that set my teeth on edge. For a moment, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. But then, as the sound faded, I saw the shimmer begin to change. Its form became more stable, more defined, and to my amazement, it began to take on a shape that was almost human. What is happening to me?" The voice that emerged from the shimmer was unlike anything I'd ever heard, a mixture of countless tones and timbres, as if 1,000 voices were speaking as one. I approached cautiously, my hands held out in a gesture of peace. "The plant. I think it's helping you focus, helping you understand us better." The shimmer looked down at its newly formed hands, flexing fingers that had never existed before. "I feel different, more contained, but also more." "That's good," I said, taking another step closer. "Now maybe we can talk properly. Why have you been taking people?" The shimmer's new face, a fluid mix of features that seemed to encompass every human race, contorted in what might have been confusion or distress. We have been alone for so long, traveled so far. When we found your world, your species, you were unlike anything we had encountered, so complex, so varied. We needed to understand." "But why take people?" I pressed. "Why not just, I don't know, observe us?" The shimmer shook its head, the movement oddly human. "Observation was not enough. We needed to experience, to feel what you feel. But our attempts to connect, they caused fear, pain. We did not understand why." I felt a wave of empathy wash over me. The entity before me wasn't malevolent. It was lonely, curious, and tragically misguided in its attempts to connect. "Look," I said, gesturing to Tom and the other captives. "I understand you're trying to learn about us, but this isn't the way. You're hurting people, separating them from their loved ones. That's not how you foster understanding." The shimmer was quiet for a long moment, its new eyes roaming over the unconscious forms of its captives. I did not intend harm. How can we learn without this?" An idea struck me then. bold and potentially dangerous, but feeling inexplicably right. What if I volunteered? If I stayed here, willingly to teach you about humanity, to be a bridge between our species? The shimmer's form rippled with what I sensed was excitement. You would do this? Willingly separate from your kind to help us understand? I nodded, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. On one condition: you let everyone else go. My brother, these other people, they all go free. And you promise not to take anyone else against their will. Agreed, the shimmer said without hesitation. It waved a hand, and the captives began to stir. Tom's eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to shock as he took in the scene before him. Jake? What's going on? What is that thing? I rushed to his side, helping him to his feet. It's okay, Tom. Everything's going to be all right now. I'll explain everything, but right now you need to get these people out of here. What? I'm not leaving you here with that, whatever it is, Tom protested. I gripped his shoulders, looking him straight in the eye. Tom, listen to me. I'm staying here voluntarily. I'm going to help the shimmer understand us, so nothing like this ever happens again. But I need you to trust me and get everyone to safety. Tom searched my face, conflict clear in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. Okay, but I'm coming back for you. You hear me? This isn't goodbye. I pulled him into a tight hug. I know. Now go, quickly. As Tom helped the other former captives to their feet and began leading them out of the clearing, I turned back to the shimmer. Its new form was watching the proceedings with what looked like fascination. They care for each other, it observed. Even strangers. Why? I smiled, feeling like a teacher about to begin the most important lesson of his life. That's part of what makes us human. Empathy, compassion, even for those we don't know. It's one of our greatest strengths. The shimmer nodded slowly. We have much to learn. Yes, I agreed. And I have much to learn about you. But we have time now, and we'll do it the right way. As the sound of Tom and the others faded into the distance, I felt a profound sense of purpose settle over me. I was standing at the threshold of something monumental, a chance to bridge the gap between two vastly different forms of life. The shimmer extended a hand towards me, and this time, I took it without hesitation. The moment we touched, I felt a connection form, not the overwhelming flood of before, but a gentle exchange of thoughts and feelings. Show me, the shimmer said, its myriad voices blending into something almost melodic. Show me what it means to be human. And so, as the impossible forest stirred around us, I began to share. I shared memories of my childhood, the love of my family, the joy of friendship, the pain of loss. I shared the beauty of art, the wonder of scientific discovery, the complex tapestry of human culture and history. In return, the shimmer shared glimpses of its own vast history, of journeys across the cosmos, of worlds and life forms beyond imagination, of the profound loneliness of being the only one of its kind. As our exchange deepened, I felt the forest around us respond. The alien flora seemed to reach towards us, the very air thrumming with newfound harmony. And I knew, with unshakable certainty, that this was just the beginning. The final confrontation had not been one of violence, but of understanding. And in that understanding, a new chapter was beginning, not just for me, or for the shimmer, but potentially for all of humanity. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the canopy, casting the clearing in an ethereal glow, I couldn't help but smile. Our hunting trip had turned into first contact, our fear into fascination, and now, standing side by side with a being from beyond the stars, I was ready to begin the greatest adventure of my life. The shimmer, its new form radiating a sense of peace I had never felt before, turned its multifaceted gaze to the horizon. What now, Jake of Earth? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight and wonder of the moment. Now we learn, we grow, and together, we bridge the gap between our worlds. As we set off into the heart of the transformed forest, I knew that the road ahead would be challenging. There would be misunderstandings, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But there would also be discovery, growth, and the forging of a bond unlike any in human history. Our hunt had ended. Our true journey was just beginning. The creature's unearthly shriek echoed through the cave as it began to materialize fully before our eyes. What was once a barely visible, shimmering outline now took solid form, a nightmarish amalgamation of predatory features that defied classification. Its skin, mottled and leathery, pulsated with an otherworldly glow. Sharp, obsidian-like claws extended from elongated fingers, and rows of needle-like teeth lined its gaping maw. But as quickly as it had materialized, it began to disintegrate. Flakes of its flesh peeled away, turning to ash before they hit the ground. The creature thrashed and howled, its cries becoming more guttural and desperate with each passing second. My brother and I stood transfixed, our weapons still raised, as our tormentor of the past several days crumbled before us. "Is it dying?" my brother Jake whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. I nodded slowly, unable to tear my eyes away from the macabre spectacle. "I think so. The plant must have disrupted whatever kept it invisible or between worlds or whatever it was." As the last remnants of the creature dissolved into a pile of ash, an eerie silence fell over the cave. The only sounds were our ragged breathing and the occasional drip of water from the stalactites above. "We did it," Jake said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "We actually did it, Sam." I lowered my makeshift spear, fashioned from a branch and the remnants of the mystical plant that had proven to be the creature's weakness. "Yeah, we did. But we're not done yet." Remembering the other captives we had seen earlier, we quickly made our way deeper into the cave system. The creature's lair was a twisted maze of tunnels and chambers, some natural, others seemingly carved out by claws far larger than any terrestrial animal. In the largest chamber, we found them. 5 people, all in various states of consciousness, bound by some sort of organic, root-like material. The sight made my stomach churn. "Hey!" I called out, rushing to the nearest person, a middle-aged man with a wild, overgrown beard. "We're here to help. The creature is dead." The man's eyes, initially unfocused, suddenly snapped to attention. "Dead? You killed it?" Jake was already working on freeing a young woman from her bindings. "Yeah, it's over. We're getting you all out of here." As we worked to free the captives, they began to talk, their voices weak but filled with a desperate hope. "How long have we been here?" asked a teenage boy, no older than 16. I shared a look with Jake, realizing we had no idea ourselves. "We're not sure," I admitted. "But we're going to get you home, I promise." One by one, we helped the captives to their feet. Some could walk on their own, while others needed support. The cave exit seemed miles away, each step a monumental effort for those who had been trapped here for who knows how long. As we neared the cave entrance, sunlight began to filter in, growing brighter with each step. The captives squinted, shielding their eyes from the light they had been deprived of for so long. "Wait," Jake said, holding up a hand. "Before we go out there, we need to think this through. We don't know what's waiting for us, how long we've been gone, or what people might think happened to us." I nodded, understanding his concern. "You're right. We can't just walk into town with 5 missing people in tow without raising some serious questions." The middle-aged man who had introduced himself as Robert spoke up. "There's a ranger station about 5 miles east of here. If we can make it there, they can call for help." It was as good a plan as any. We gathered what supplies we could find in the cave, mostly scraps of clothing and a few water-filled depressions that seemed clean enough to drink from, and prepared to leave. As we stepped out of the cave and into the forest, the world seemed both familiar and alien. The trees were the same species we knew, but they seemed taller, fuller. The underbrush was thicker than I remembered. We had been walking for about an hour when we heard it. a long, mournful howl that sent shivers down my spine. It was distant but unmistakable. Jake froze in his tracks, his face pale. That sounded like... I know, I said, my mouth suddenly dry. But it can't be. We killed it. The teenage boy, Tim, looked between us, his eyes wide with fear. What? What was that? I tried to keep my voice calm. It's probably just a wolf. Nothing to worry about. But as I shared a knowing look with Jake, I knew we were both thinking the same thing. Our ordeal might not be over after all. We picked up the pace, pushing through the exhaustion and fear. The ranger station was our beacon of hope, our link back to the world we had left behind. As we crested a hill, we saw it. A small wooden building with a radio antenna on the roof. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. A man in a park ranger uniform was outside, staring at us in disbelief. As we approached, I could see the color drain from his face. "Oh my God," he whispered. "You're them. You're the missing hikers." Jake stepped forward. "Yes, we are. We need help. These people need medical attention." The ranger seemed to snap out of his shock and rushed to assist us. As he helped Robert into the station, he called over his shoulder, "I'm radioing for emergency services now, but you should know." "Know what?" I asked, a sense of dread building in my stomach. The ranger hesitated before answering. "You've been missing for 3 months. The search parties gave up weeks ago. Everyone thought you were dead." The news hit us like a physical blow. 3 months. We had lost an entire season to that cave, to that creature. As we waited for help to arrive, the reality of our situation began to sink in. Our lives had continued without us. The world had moved on, believing us lost forever. The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air, and soon the small clearing around the ranger station was a flurry of activity. Paramedics tended to the weakest among us, while police officers began taking preliminary statements. A detective approached Jake and me, notepad in hand. "I know you've been through a lot," he began, his voice gentle but probing. "But can you tell me what happened out there?" Jake and I exchanged glances. How could we possibly explain what we had experienced? Who would believe us? "We got lost," I said finally. "We found these other people. We survived together." The detective's eyes narrowed slightly. "For 3 months? In these woods?" Jake nodded, backing up my story. "We found shelter, foraged for food. It's all a blur, really." I could tell the detective wasn't satisfied, but he seemed to sense our reluctance to say more. "All right. We'll talk more later. For now, let's get you to the hospital." As we were led to the waiting ambulances, I caught sight of our reflections in the vehicle's polished surface. Our clothes were tattered, our faces gaunt and weathered. We looked like we had aged years, not months. Just before the ambulance doors closed, I heard it again. That haunting howl, closer this time. Jake's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. "It's not over, is it?" he whispered. I shook my head slowly. "No, I don't think it is. But whatever's out there, whatever's left, we'll face it together." As the ambulance pulled away, carrying us back to the world we had left behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that our encounter in the woods was just the beginning of something much larger, much more terrifying. The creature might be gone, but its legacy lived on, in the forests of Montana, in the nightmares we would surely have, and in the knowledge that the world was far stranger and more dangerous than we had ever imagined. Our ordinary lives were over. A new chapter was beginning, one filled with uncertainty, danger, and the grim determination to uncover the truth behind what we had experienced. As the ambulance sped towards the hospital, I closed my eyes, trying to prepare myself for the challenges that lay ahead. Whatever was waiting for us, be it government agents, more creatures, or simply the disbelief of a world not ready for the truth, we would face it. After all, we were survivors now. And survivors adapt. They endure. They fight back. crisp autumn air nipped at my cheeks as I adjusted my camera, capturing the eerie stillness of the Washington forest. The afternoon light filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of damp earth and pine needles. Just a few more shots, I muttered to myself, stepping carefully over a gnarled root. As a wildlife photographer, I was used to spending long hours alone in nature, but something about this particular forest sent shivers down my spine. I framed my next shot, focusing on a cluster of ancient trees whose branches twisted and intertwined like arthritic fingers reaching for the sky. As I peered through the viewfinder, a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. I lowered the camera and scanned the area, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. "Get it together, Mia," I chided myself. "You're letting your imagination run wild." I shook off the unease and continued my work, moving deeper into the forest. The further I went, the more the silence seemed to press in around me. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush, just an oppressive quiet that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. As the light began to fade, I decided to call it a day. I packed up my gear and pulled out my phone to check my location. My heart sank as I realized I had no signal. "Great," I sighed. "Just great." I was about to start retracing my steps when curiosity got the better of me. I decided to review some of the photos I'd taken, hoping to spot any wildlife I might have missed. Scrolling through the images, I noticed something odd. In several of the shots, there were strange distortions in the shadows between the trees. At first, I thought it might be a problem with my camera, but the anomalies appeared in the same locations across multiple photos. Frowning, I zoomed in on one of the digital images. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the screen. There, in the depths of the shadow, I could have sworn I saw an eye blink. "No way," I whispered, my heart pounding. "That's impossible." I looked up from my camera, scanning the darkening forest with new eyes. The shadows seemed to shift and move in ways that defied logic. I blinked hard, telling myself it was just a trick of the fading light. But as I stood there, rooted to the spot, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The silence of the forest now felt oppressive, as if something was holding its breath, waiting. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and insignificant in the vastness of the woods. "Is anyone there?" No response came, but the shadows seemed to deepen, stretching towards me like grasping fingers. Panic began to set in as I realized how quickly darkness was falling. I needed to get out of there fast. I shoved my camera into my backpack and started walking briskly in the direction I thought I'd come from. But as the minutes ticked by and the light continued to fade, a sickening realization dawned on me. I was lost. "Stay calm," I told myself, trying to keep the fear at bay. "Just keep moving. You'll find your way out." But with each step, the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees loomed larger, their branches reaching out like claws. The shadows between them grew darker, deeper, almost pulsing with a life of their own. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking as I switched it on. The beam cut through the gloom, but instead of providing comfort, it only served to accentuate the unnatural darkness that surrounded me. As I swept the light across the forest floor, searching for any sign of a trail, a movement caught my eye. I froze, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. There, just at the edge of the flashlight's beam, something moved. It wasn't the wind rustling leaves or an animal darting through the underbrush. No, this was something else entirely. A patch of darkness that seemed to absorb the light, with a depth and texture that made no sense. And then I saw it, an eye, opening within the shadow itself. It blinked once, twice, fixing me with an alien gaze that sent ice through my veins. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. My foot caught on a root and I fell hard, the flashlight flying from my grasp. It hit the ground and went out, plunging me into total darkness. Panic overwhelmed me. I scrambled to my feet, no longer caring about direction, driven only by the primal need to escape. I ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. The forest came alive around me, filled with whispers and movement. Shadows danced at the corners of my vision, always just out of sight but undeniably present. I could feel them reaching for me, cold tendrils brushing against my skin. "Help!" I screamed, my voice hoarse with terror. "Somebody, please help me!" But my cries were swallowed by the darkness, lost in a forest that no longer felt like part of the natural world. As I ran, one thought pounded through my mind. The shadows between the trees had eyes that blinked, and now those eyes were fixed on me. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that endless night. But eventually, exhaustion overtook me. I collapsed to the ground, my lungs burning, every muscle screaming in protest. As I lay there, gasping for breath, I became aware of a change in the air. The oppressive darkness began to lift, ever so slightly. I raised my head, hardly daring to hope. In the distance, a faint glow appeared. Dawn was breaking. With the first rays of sunlight, the shadows retreated, slinking back to their places between the trees. The forest fell silent once more, but it was the natural quiet of early morning, not the smothering silence of the night before. I slowly got to my feet, wincing at my various cuts and bruises. As I looked around, I realized I was standing in a small clearing. In the growing light, I could see a trail leading off to my right. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by a deep unease. What had happened last night? Had it all been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear? Or had I stumbled upon something beyond my understanding? As I started down the trail, hoping it would lead me back to civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that my ordeal was far from over. I had seen something in the shadows of this forest, something that defied explanation, and somehow, I knew that by seeing it, I had changed everything. The shadows between the trees had eyes that blinked, and now those eyes were watching me. As I left the clearing, I couldn't help but glance back. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of movement in the darkness between two ancient pines. A chill ran down my spine as I turned and hurried down the path, eager to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever lurked in the shadows of the Washington forest. I stumbled through the darkening forest, my flashlight barely piercing the gloom. The events of the previous night still haunted me, but I had convinced myself it was all a product of an overactive imagination. Now, as I made my way back into the woods to retrieve my lost equipment, I wasn't so sure. "It's just a forest," I muttered to myself, trying to quell the rising panic in my chest. "There's nothing to be afraid of." But even as I said the words, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. The shadows seemed deeper, more alive somehow. They shifted and elongated in ways that defied logic, stretching towards me like grasping fingers. I swept my flashlight beam across the forest floor, searching for any sign of my lost gear. The light caught on something reflective, and I moved towards it, hope rising in my chest. As I bent to pick up my camera, a whisper drifted past me, soft and ancient, carried on the wind. I froze, straining my ears. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is someone there?" No answer came, but the whisper continued, just at the edge of hearing. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. Not quite words, but not random noise either. It sent chills down my spine. I straightened up, clutching my recovered camera to my chest like a talisman. "I need to get out of here," I said aloud, trying to bolster my courage with the sound of my own voice. But as I turned to leave, my flashlight began to flicker. I tapped it against my palm, willing it to stay lit. For a moment it seemed to stabilize, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Then, without warning, it died completely, plunging me into total darkness. "No, no, no," I pleaded, frantically pressing the switch. But it was no use. The darkness pressed in around me, thick and oppressive. In the pitch black, my other senses seemed to heighten. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me in an incomprehensible chorus. And then I felt it. Something brushed against my skin, cold and otherworldly. I let out a strangled cry, stumbling backward. My foot caught on a root and I fell hard, the camera flying from my grasp. I heard it hit the ground with a sickening crack. As I lay there, winded and disoriented, I became aware of movement all around me. The darkness itself seemed to be shifting, coalescing into shapes that my mind struggled to comprehend. "What do you want?" I shouted into the void, fear and frustration overwhelming me. To my shock, I received an answer. Not in words, but in sensations and images that flooded my mind. Ancient forests, deeper and darker than any on earth today. Shadows that lived and breathed, that hungered. A world where darkness reigned, and light was the intruder. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Leave me alone!" I cried out, spinning around blindly. But the presence only grew stronger. I felt cold tendrils wrapping around my ankles, creeping up my legs. The whispering intensified, becoming a roar that threatened to overwhelm my senses. In desperation, I reached for my phone. The screen blazed to life, momentarily blinding me. But that brief flash of light was enough. The shadows recoiled, retreating to the edges of the small circle of illumination. I didn't waste a second. I ran, using the phone's feeble light to guide my way. Branches whipped at my face. Roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't slow down. I could feel the shadows pursuing me, always just a step behind. As I ran, my mind raced. What were these things? How could shadows be alive? It defied everything I thought I knew about the world. Yet I couldn't deny the evidence of my own senses. Suddenly, my foot caught on something, and I went down hard. My phone flew from my hand, skidding across the forest floor. As its light faded into the distance, I found myself once again engulfed in darkness. But this time, I wasn't alone. I felt a presence looming over me, ancient and alien. A voice spoke directly into my mind, bypassing my ears entirely. "You see us," it said, its tone a mix of curiosity and hunger. "How is this possible?" I tried to speak, but fear had robbed me of my voice. I could only lie there, trembling, as the entity examined me. "Your kind has forgotten us," it continued, "pushed us to the margins of your world, but we remember, we wait, and now you have opened a door." What are you?" I finally managed to choke out. The answer came not in words, but in a flood of images and sensations. I saw the birth of the universe, the first shadows cast by newborn stars. I felt the hunger of these ancient beings, their need for darkness and their fear of light. "We are the Shadow Eaters," the voice explained. "We were here long before your kind, and we will be here long after. You have seen us, and now you are marked." Terror gripped me. Marked? What does that mean? But before I could get an answer, a new sound cut through the night, the distant barking of a dog. The shadows recoiled, retreating to the deepest parts of the forest. As they withdrew, I felt a change come over me. My eyes adjusted to the darkness in a way they never had before. I could see shapes and patterns in the shadows, hints of the entities that lurked within them. I stumbled to my feet, my whole body shaking. In the distance, I could see lights moving through the trees, a search party. As I moved towards the lights, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The shadows between the trees still had eyes that blinked, but now I could see them. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that they could see me too. I reached the search party, collapsing into the arms of a concerned park ranger. As they fussed over me, checking for injuries and wrapping me in a shock blanket, I tried to explain what had happened. But the words sounded crazy even to my own ears. "Just got a bit turned around in the dark," I finally said, forcing a weak smile. "Thank you for finding me." But as they led me out of the forest, I couldn't help but look back. In the deepest shadows between the trees, I saw movement, and I knew that this was just the beginning. The Shadow Eaters were aware of me now, and something told me they wouldn't let me go easily. As we reached the edge of the forest, I made a silent vow. I would uncover the truth about these entities no matter the cost. Because if I didn't, I feared the shadows might soon stretch far beyond this ancient forest, Plunging the whole world into a darkness from which it might never emerge. Dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. I found myself in a clearing, unsure how I got there. My clothes were torn, my body bruised, and my mind reeling from the night's terrifying encounters. As I sat on a fallen log, trying to gather my thoughts, I heard the crunch of leaves underfoot. I whirled around, half expecting to see more living shadows. Instead, I was met with the weathered face of a grizzled old forest ranger. His silver hair peeked out from under a worn ranger hat, and his eyes held a wisdom that seemed to match the ancient trees surrounding us. "Rough night, eh?" he said, his voice gravelly but kind. I nodded, unable to find words to describe what I'd experienced. The ranger sat down beside me, pulling out a thermos. "Name's Jack," he said, pouring a steaming cup of coffee and offering it to me. "And you must be the photographer everyone's been looking for." "Mia," I replied, gratefully accepting the coffee. Its warmth seeped into my hands, grounding me. I got lost." Jack's eyes narrowed slightly, studying me. "Lost, huh? Seems to me you found something out there." I stared at him, my heart racing. Could I trust this stranger with what I'd seen? Would he even believe me? Taking a deep breath, I decided to take the plunge. "I saw things in the shadows, things that shouldn't exist." I braced myself for disbelief, even ridicule, but Jack just nodded solemnly. "Figured as much. You've got that look about you." The look of someone who's seen behind the veil. My jaw dropped. You believe me?" Jack chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, I more than believe you, Mia. I've seen him myself." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a battered leather notebook. As he flipped it open, I saw pages filled with sketches, dark, swirling forms with glowing eyes, eerily similar to what I'd encountered. "They're called shadow eaters," Jack explained, his voice low. "Ancient beings that feed on darkness. They've been here long before us, and they'll be here long after we're gone." I leaned in, examining the sketches. "But how? Why haven't more people seen them?" Jack closed the notebook with a sigh. "Most folks can't see them, or if they do, they convince themselves it was just their imagination. But every now and then, someone comes along who can really see. Someone like you." "But why me?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. "I'm just a wildlife photographer. There's nothing special about me." Jack shook his head. "Don't sell yourself short, Mia. The fact that you can see them means you've got a sensitivity to the hidden world. It's rare, and it's valuable." He paused, looking out into the forest. "But it's also dangerous. By seeing them, you've become their prey." A chill ran down my spine. "Their prey? What do you mean?" Jack turned back to me, his expression grave. "The shadow eaters, they feed on darkness, yes. But they hunger for something more. The darkness in people's souls. And those who can see them? Well, we're like a feast to them." I felt the blood drain from my face. "So what do I do? How do I protect myself?" "Knowledge is your best defense," Jack said, handing me his notebook. "Everything I've learned about them over the years is in here. Study it, understand them." I took the notebook with trembling hands. "But why are you helping me? Why tell me all this?" Jack's eyes softened. "Because 30 years ago I was in your shoes. Young ranger, out on a routine patrol. Saw something I couldn't explain. An old-timer like me helped me then. Figured it's my turn to pass on the torch." He stood up, groaning as his joints protested. "Come on, let's get you back to civilization. You've got a lot to process, and these woods aren't safe for you right now." As we walked, Jack filled me in on more details. He explained how the shadow eaters were normally content to stay in the deepest, darkest parts of the forest. But recently, something had changed. "They're getting bolder," he said, ducking under a low-hanging branch, venturing closer to the edges of the forest, closer to people. "I've been trying to figure out why, but..." He trailed off, lost in thought. I seized the opportunity to ask about something that had been nagging at me. "Jack, last night, I took photos. Photos that seemed to capture these shadow eaters. But when I checked my camera this morning, they were gone." Corrupted files. Jack nodded, unsurprised. They don't like being recorded. Photos, videos, they all tend to mysteriously disappear or get corrupted. It's like they exist just outside of what our technology can capture. We reached the ranger station, a small wooden building at the edge of the forest. As Jack opened the door, I hesitated. "What do I do now?" I asked, feeling lost and overwhelmed. Jack placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You've got two choices, Mia. You can try to forget what you've seen, go back to your life, and hope they leave you alone." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "Or you can embrace this gift you've been given. Use it to help protect others who might not be able to see the danger." I thought about the terror of the previous night, the feeling of being hunted by something ancient and unknowable. But I also thought about the wonder of it all, the realization that the world was far more mysterious and magical than I'd ever imagined. "I want to help," I said finally, my voice stronger than I felt. "I want to understand." Jack smiled, a mix of pride and sadness in his eyes. "I had a feeling you'd say that. Well then, let's get started. We've got a lot of work to do." As we entered the ranger station, I felt a shift within myself. The fear was still there, but it was tempered now by determination and curiosity. I had been given a glimpse into a hidden world, and I was determined to uncover its secrets. Jack began pulling out maps and more notebooks, spreading them across his desk. "First things first," he said. "We need to map out where you had your encounters, see if we can spot any patterns." As I leaned over the map, tracing my journey through the forest, I couldn't help but glance out the window. The shadows between the trees seemed to shift and dance even in the bright morning light. I knew that my life had changed irrevocably. The shadow eaters were out there, watching and waiting. But now, I was watching too. And I was determined to shed light on their dark world, no matter the cost. The bus jolted as it hit a pothole, snapping me out of my uneasy slumber. I blinked, disoriented, before remembering where I was. On my way back to the city, my camera bag clutched tightly to my chest. The events in the forest felt like a distant nightmare, but the weight of Jack's notebook in my backpack reminded me it had all been terrifyingly real. "You okay, miss?" the elderly woman next to me asked, her brow furrowed with concern. I forced a smile. "Yes, thank you. Just a bit tired." As I turned to look out the window, my breath caught in my throat. There, just for a moment, I saw a flicker of movement in the shadows between the trees lining the highway. A chill ran down my spine as I realized they were following me. The rest of the journey passed in a blur of anxiety and hypervigilance. By the time I reached my apartment, I was a bundle of frayed nerves. I fumbled with my keys, acutely aware of the lengthening shadows as the sun began to set. Once inside, I leaned against the door, letting out a shaky breath. "You're safe now," I told myself. "They can't get you here." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The shadow eaters had followed me from the forest. They were here, in the city, and I had no idea how to stop them. I spent the next few hours poring over Jack's notebook, trying to make sense of his cramped handwriting and cryptic diagrams. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from my editor, demanding to know where I was and why I hadn't submitted my photos yet. Finally, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I picked up the phone. "Mia, where the hell have you been?" My editor, Sarah, practically shouted. "I'm sorry, Sarah," I said, rubbing my temples. "There were some complications in the forest. I'm back now and I'm working on the photos." "Complications?" "Mia, we have a deadline. The magazine goes to print in 3 days. I need those photos." I glanced at my camera bag, knowing the memory cards inside held nothing but corrupted files. I know. Just give me until tomorrow. I'll have something for you, I promise." Sarah sighed heavily. "Fine. Tomorrow morning, my office. And Mia, this better be good." The line went dead. I slumped in my chair, overwhelmed by the impossible task ahead of me. How could I explain that the shadows themselves had eaten my photos? Determined to salvage something from this disaster, I set up my laptop and began downloading the images from my camera. To my shock, a few photos had survived. Blurry, distorted images that hinted at the otherworldly creatures I'd encountered. As I worked to enhance the images, a movement in my peripheral vision made me freeze. Slowly, I turned to look at the window. The streetlight outside flickered, and in that moment of darkness I saw them, writhing shadows with glowing eyes, pressing against the glass. My heart pounding, I scrambled to save my work and pack up my equipment. I couldn't stay here. They had found me. I spent the night moving from one 24-hour cafe to another, nursing cups of coffee and jumping at every shadow. By morning, I was exhausted but determined. I had to share my discovery with the world. Consequences be damned. The subway ride to Sarah's office was a nightmare of paranoia. Every dark corner, every flicker of the fluorescent lights sent my heart racing. When I finally reached the magazine's building, I practically ran inside, seeking the safety of the bright, bustling office. "Mia, you look terrible," Sarah said as I burst into her office. "What happened to you out there?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Sarah, I need you to keep an open mind. What I found in that forest, and it's going to change everything." For the next hour, I laid it all out. The living shadows, the ancient ones, the hidden world that existed alongside our own. I showed her the enhanced photos, blurry but undeniably strange. Sarah listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, studying me intently. "Mia," she said slowly, "do you realize what you're saying? Living shadows, ancient beings, it's crazy, I know," I interrupted. "But it's true, Sarah. I saw them. I have proof." Sarah shook her head. "What you have are some blurry photos and a wild story. Mia, you're one of our best photographers. If you need some time off, just say the word, but we can't publish this." Frustration and fear welled up inside me. "Sarah, please, you have to believe me. People need to know about this. They need to be prepared." "Prepared for what? Shadow monsters?" Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "Mia, listen to yourself. You sound like you need help." I stood up abruptly, gathering my things. "Fine. If you won't help me, I'll find someone who will." As I stormed out of the office, I could feel the pitying looks of my colleagues. But I didn't care. I knew what I had seen, what I had experienced, and I was determined to make others see it too. Over the next few days, I reached out to everyone I could think of. Other magazines, newspapers, even local TV stations. But the response was always the same: polite disbelief at best, outright dismissal at worst. Strange accidents and mishaps plagued my efforts. Emails would disappear before sending. Phone calls would drop at crucial moments. And always, I could feel the shadows watching, following, waiting. It was late one night, as I was walking home from another failed meeting, that I saw them clearly again. The streetlights flickered and went out, plunging the street into darkness. And there they were, shadow eaters, no longer hiding, moving towards me with purpose. I ran, my heart pounding in my ears. I could feel their cold touch on the back of my neck, hear their whispers in my mind. As I rounded a corner, I collided with someone. "Whoa, easy there," a man's voice said, steadying me. "Are you all right?" I looked up to see a concerned face. Behind him, I could see a press pass dangling from his neck. A journalist. "You," I gasped, clutching at his jacket. "You have to help me. They're coming. The shadows. They're alive, and they're coming for me." The man's expression changed from concern to interest. "Slow down. What do you mean the shadows are alive?" For a moment, hope flared in my chest. Maybe finally someone would listen. But as I opened my mouth to explain, I saw movement behind him. The shadows were gathering, watching, waiting. I made a split-second decision. "Not here," I whispered urgently. "It's not safe. Please, can we go somewhere to talk? I have proof. I can show you everything." The journalist hesitated, then nodded. "All right. There's a diner around the corner. We can talk there." As we walked, I could feel the shadows retreating, but I knew they weren't gone. They were just biding their time. Sitting in the brightly lit diner, clutching a cup of coffee, I began my story once again. But this time, as I spoke, I realized something had changed. The journalist wasn't just listening, he was believing. "I've heard whispers of things like this," he said, leaning in. "Stories that don't add up, disappearances that can't be explained. But nothing this concrete. If what you're saying is true?" "It is," I insisted, "and I can prove it. But we need to be careful. They don't want this getting out." As we talked, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I had found an ally in this impossible fight. But even as we made plans to investigate further, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Shadow Eaters were watching, waiting for their moment to strike. The battle for the truth, and possibly for the very soul of our world, was just beginning, and I was right in the middle of it. The flickering neon sign of the dingy motel cast an eerie glow across the room, reminding me all too much of the shadows that had been haunting me. I paced nervously, waiting for my unlikely allies to arrive. A sharp knock at the door made me jump. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. "It's us, Mia. Open up," came a familiar voice. I unlocked the door, revealing the faces of my newfound team. Jake, the skeptical journalist who had finally started to believe my wild tale, and Dr. Eleanor Reeves, a renowned cryptozoologist I had managed to contact through some of Jake's connections. "You weren't followed?" I asked, ushering them inside. Jake shook his head. "We were careful, just like you said. Took a roundabout route, kept to well-lit areas." Dr. Reeves, a stern-looking woman in her 50s with sharp eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses, surveyed the room. "Ms. Chen, I hope you realize the professional risk I'm taking by being here. Your story is, well, it's unprecedented." I nodded, understanding her hesitation. "I know it sounds crazy, Dr. Reeves, but I swear to you, everything I've told you is true. And I'm hoping that with your expertise and Jake's investigative skills, we can find a way to prove it." Jake pulled out his laptop, setting it on the rickety motel table. "I've been doing some digging since we last spoke, Mia. There are patterns, disappearances, unexplained phenomena, all centered around areas with dense old-growth forests." Dr. Reeves leaned in, intrigued despite her skepticism. "And you believe these are connected to Ms. Chen's Shadow Eaters?" "I don't know what to believe anymore," Jake admitted. "But something's going on, and it's bigger than just one forest in Washington." I retrieved Jack's notebook from my bag, laying it open on the table. "This is everything the old ranger told me about the Shadow Eaters, their habits, their weaknesses, at least what he knew of them." Dr. Reeves adjusted her glasses, poring over the pages with growing interest. "Fascinating. If this is authentic, it suggests an entire ecosystem existing alongside our own, yet remaining largely undetected." "Oh, it's authentic, all right," I said, suppressing a shudder as I remembered my encounters in the forest. "And they're not content to stay hidden anymore. They're getting bolder, hungrier." Jake looked up from his laptop. "So what's our next move? We can't exactly walk into a newspaper office with this. We need hard evidence." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to propose. "We need to go back to the forest. All of us. We need to capture proof of the Shadow Eaters on film, with multiple witnesses." The room fell silent as the weight of my suggestion sank in. Dr. Reeves was the first to speak. "Ms. Chen, what you're proposing is incredibly dangerous. If these entities are real and as powerful as you claim, we'd be putting our lives at risk." "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But what choice do we have? If we don't do something, more people will disappear. The shadows will keep spreading." Jake ran a hand through his hair, conflicted. "She's right, Doc. If this is real, we can't just sit back and do nothing." After a moment of tense silence, Dr. Reeves nodded. "Very well, but we do this my way. I have access to specialized equipment through my university contacts. Cameras with enhanced low-light capabilities, infrared sensors, the works. If these shadow eaters exist, we'll capture them on film. Over the next few days, we prepared for our expedition. Dr. Reeves procured an impressive array of scientific equipment, while Jake used his journalistic contacts to secure us access to the restricted areas of the forest. I spent hours poring over Jack's notebook, trying to glean any information that might help us survive our encounter with the shadow eaters. Finally, the day of our expedition arrived. As we drove towards the forest, an oppressive silence fell over our group. The weight of what we were about to do hung heavy in the air. We reached the edge of the forest just as the sun was beginning to set. Dr. Reeves began setting up her equipment with practiced efficiency. "Remember," I said, my voice tense. "Stay in the light as much as possible. They're strongest in complete darkness." Jake nodded, checking the battery on his camera for the 100th time. "Got it. Light is good, dark is bad." As night fell, we ventured into the forest. The beams of our high-powered flashlights cut through the gloom, but the darkness between the trees seemed to swallow the light hungrily. For hours, we searched, our equipment humming softly in the eerie silence of the forest. Just as frustration was beginning to set in, I saw it, a flicker of movement in the shadows, too fluid to be natural. "There," I hissed, pointing. "Did you see it?" Dr. Reeves swung her camera around, its low-light sensor whirring. "I'm not picking up anything on the infrared, but... Wait, what's that?" On her monitor, a dark mass was coalescing, taking on a shape that defied description. As we watched in horrified fascination, glowing points of light appeared within the mass, eyes blinking and multiplying. "It's them," I whispered. "The shadow eaters." Suddenly, our equipment began to malfunction. Cameras shuttered off, sensors beeped in alarm, and our flashlights flickered ominously. "We need to leave now," I shouted. But it was too late. The shadows came alive around us, writhing and reaching with tendrils of darkness. I could hear their whispers in my mind, a cacophony of ancient, hungry voices. "Run!" Jake yelled, grabbing Dr. Reeves's arm as she stood transfixed by the impossible sight before her. We fled through the forest, the shadows pursuing us relentlessly. Equipment was abandoned in our desperate flight, the need for evidence forgotten in the face of sheer survival. As we burst into a small clearing, I realized with horror that we were surrounded. The shadow eaters had cut off our escape, their dark forms blocking every path. "What do we do now?" Jake panted, his eyes wide with fear. Dr. Reeves, her scientific skepticism shattered, clutched her last remaining sensor like a lifeline. "This is impossible. They can't be real." But they were real, and they were closing in. In that moment of despair, I remembered something from Jack's notebook. A last, desperate gambit. "Light," I shouted. "We need to make as much light as possible." Understanding dawned on Jake's face. He pulled out his phone, turning on its flashlight function. Dr. Reeves and I did the same, and suddenly the clearing was illuminated by the combined glow of our devices. The shadow eaters recoiled, hissing in pain or frustration. Slowly, they retreated to the edges of our makeshift circle of light. "It's working," Dr. Reeves breathed, awe and terror mingling in her voice. But our relief was short-lived. One by one, our phone batteries began to die, the circle of light shrinking with each passing moment. Just as the last phone flickered out, a new light burst through the trees. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, and I heard a familiar voice shouting my name. "Mia, over here." It was Jack, the old ranger, leading a group of Forest Service personnel. The shadow eaters, overwhelmed by the sudden influx of light, retreated into the deepest shadows of the forest. As Jack helped us out of the clearing, I could see the mixture of relief and grim understanding on his weathered face. "Looks like you found what you were looking for," he said quietly, "though I'm guessing you wish you hadn't." Looking back at the dark forest, I nodded. "They're real, Jack, and they're not staying hidden anymore. What do we do now?" Jack's expression was resolute. Now we fight back. You've seen them, you've survived them. That makes you part of a very small, very important group of people. Welcome to the resistance, Mia." As we made our way out of the forest, I knew that our ordeal was far from over. The Shadow Eaters were real, and they were spreading. But now, at least, we weren't facing them alone. A resistance was forming, and I was part of it. The battle for our world, for the light, had only just begun. I sat in front of the television, my heart pounding as I watched the news unfold. Reports of strange phenomena and disappearances flooded every channel, each story more chilling than the last. In breaking news, another unexplained blackout has hit downtown Seattle, the anchor announced, her voice tense. Eyewitnesses report seeing strange moving shadows just before all lights in the area went out. Authorities are urging residents to stay indoors after sunset. I muted the TV, turning to Jack, who sat beside me with a grim expression. "It's getting worse," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "They're not even trying to hide anymore." Jack nodded, his weathered face etched with concern. "They're growing bolder, Mia. The balance has shifted, and they know it." Dr. Reeves burst into the room, her laptop clutched tightly to her chest. "You need to see this," she said, her usually composed demeanor shaken. She set the computer down on the coffee table, pulling up a map dotted with red markers. "I've been tracking the incidents," she explained. "Look at the pattern." As we leaned in to examine the map, Jake joined us, his journalist's notebook in hand. "It's not just the forests anymore," he observed. "They're appearing in cities, towns, anywhere with deep shadows." I felt a chill run down my spine as I watched the shadows in the room grow deeper and more menacing. "We need to do something," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "We can't just sit here and watch as they take over." Jack placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You're right, Mia. But we need to be smart about this. Running in half-cocked will only get us killed, or worse." Dr. Reeves adjusted her glasses, her scientific mind already racing. "We need to understand them better. If we can figure out what's causing this sudden expansion, maybe we can find a way to stop it." Jake nodded, flipping through his notes. "I've been compiling eyewitness accounts. There's a common thread. People are reporting feelings of despair, hopelessness, and fear just before the shadows appear. It's like they're feeding on negative emotions." A thought struck me. "Jack, your notebook mentioned something about this, didn't it? About the Shadow Eaters being drawn to darkness in people's souls." The old ranger's eyes lit up with recognition. "You're right. It was just a theory, but what if the state of the world right now is making them stronger? All the fear, the uncertainty. It's the perfect breeding ground for them," Dr. Reeves finished, her voice hushed. We spent the next few hours poring over Jack's notes, cross-referencing them with Dr. Reeves' data and Jake's interviews. As night fell, we worked by the light of every lamp we could find, the shadows outside pressing against the windows like a living thing. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a news alert. I read it aloud, my voice shaking. "Major power outage reported in Chicago. Entire downtown area in darkness. Eyewitnesses report." "Oh God." "What is it, Mia?" Jake asked, leaning forward. "They're saying people are disappearing into the shadows, just vanishing." A heavy silence fell over the room. We all knew what this meant. The Shadow Eaters were no longer content with lurking at the edges of our world. They were hunting. "We need to warn people," I said, standing up. "We have to tell them how to protect themselves." Jack shook his head. "And how do you propose we do that, Mia? Who's going to believe us?" "We have evidence now," I argued. "Dr. Reeves's data, Jake's interviews. We have to try." Dr. Reeves spoke up, her voice cautious. "Even if we could convince people, how do we fight something like this? Conventional weapons would be useless against living shadows." As if in response to her words, the lights in the room flickered ominously. We all froze, watching as the shadows in the corners seemed to deepen and writhe. "Light," Jack said suddenly. "It's always been light. We need to find a way to create light they can't extinguish." Jake snapped his fingers. "I know someone who might be able to help with that. An engineer I interviewed once about experimental energy sources. If anyone can create a sustainable, powerful light source, it's her." As Jake made the call, I found myself drawn to the window. The city below was a patchwork of light and darkness, and in the dark patches, I could swear I saw movement. "They're out there," I murmured, "watching us." Dr. Reeves joined me at the window, her face pale in the reflected lamplight. "We're in a race against time, aren't we? To save... what? The world?" I nodded, the weight of our task settling heavily on my shoulders. The world, humanity, the light itself, everything. Jack's gruff voice broke through our somber moment. "All right, enough gawking at the shadows. We've got work to do." Over the next few hours, we formulated a plan. Jake would reach out to his contacts in the media, trying to spread warnings and protective measures without causing panic. Dr. Reeves would continue her research, looking for patterns or weaknesses we could exploit. Jack and I would work on gathering and training more people who could see the Shadow Eaters, building our resistance. As dawn broke, casting its pale light over the city, we finally allowed ourselves a moment of rest. But even in the growing daylight, I could feel the shadows watching, waiting for their moment. "Do you think we can really do this?" I asked Jack as the others dozed fitfully. "Can we stop them?" The old ranger was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, Mia," he finally said, "but I do know this. As long as there's a single spark of light left in this world, we have to try." Just then Jake's phone rang, startling us all awake. He answered it, his face growing more animated as he listened. "That was my engineer friend," he said as he hung up. "She thinks she might have something that could help us. A new kind of light technology that draws power from... well, she says it's complicated, but it might be our best shot." Hope, fragile but bright, bloomed in my chest. "Then what are we waiting for? Let's go." As we gathered our things and prepared to leave, I took one last look out the window. The city was waking up, people going about their daily lives, unaware of the darkness gathering at the edges of their world. I made a silent vow to protect them, to fight the encroaching shadows with every ounce of strength I had. The battle for the light was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had a plan, we had allies, and most importantly, we had each other. The Shadow Eaters were strong, but so were we. And we had one thing they could never understand or defeat: the unquenchable human spirit, burning bright even in the darkest night. As we stepped out into the morning light, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. The spread of darkness had begun, but so had our resistance, and we were ready to fight. The sterile hallways of the government facility seemed to stretch endlessly before us as we were led deeper into the complex. Our small team, Jack, Dr. Reeves, Jake, and myself, walked in tense silence, flanked by stern-faced agents in dark suits. "I don't like this," Jack muttered under his breath. "It feels like we're walking into a trap." I nodded, trying to quell the unease in my stomach. "But what choice do we have? If they really want to help..." Our whispered conversation was cut short as we arrived at a large conference room. The agent in charge, a tall woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit, gestured for us to enter. "Dr. Reeves, Ms. Chen, gentlemen," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "I'm Agent Hawkins. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. We have much to discuss." As we took our seats around the large table, I couldn't help but feel like we were mice walking into a cat's lair. The walls were lined with screens displaying data and images that looked disturbingly familiar, shadow patterns, incident reports, and maps that mirrored our own research. Agent Hawkins began without preamble. "We've been monitoring the situation with these Shadow Eaters, as you call them. Your work has not gone unnoticed." Jake leaned forward, his journalist's instincts kicking in. "How long have you known about them? And why haven't you done anything to stop them?" Hawkins's expression remained impassive. "We've been aware of their existence for some time, Mr. Sullivan, but until recently they posed no significant threat. That has changed." Dr. Reeves's eyes narrowed behind her glasses. You're saying you've known about an entire ecosystem of shadow creatures and did nothing? Do you realize the scientific implications? We realize a great deal, Doctor. Hawkins cut her off. Which is why we're reaching out now. We need your expertise, your first-hand experience with these entities. In return, we're prepared to offer you resources beyond your wildest dreams. I exchanged glances with my teammates. The offer was tempting, but something felt off. What exactly are you proposing? I asked cautiously. Hawkins pressed a button, and the screens around us came to life with images of high-tech laboratories and advanced equipment. Full access to our research facilities, a dedicated team of scientists and operatives, and most importantly, protection for you and your loved ones as the situation escalates. Jack, who had been silent until now, spoke up. And what do you plan to do with these shadow creatures once you understand them better? A flicker of something, anticipation, excitement, passed across Hawkins' face. That's classified, I'm afraid, but I can assure you, our goal is to protect humanity at all costs. We spent the next few hours in intense discussion, poring over data and comparing notes. Despite my initial reservations, I found myself getting excited. With these resources, we might actually have a chance at stopping the Shadow Eaters. As we took a break, I pulled Jack aside. What do you think? Can we trust them? The old ranger's face was troubled. I don't know, Mia. Something doesn't feel right, but we're running out of options. Before I could respond, Dr. Reeves burst into the room, her face flushed with excitement. I think I've made a breakthrough. Come quickly. We rushed to the lab where Dr. Reeves had been working. On a large screen, a complex model of shadow patterns swirled and shifted. I've been analyzing the data from our encounters and the government's records, she explained breathlessly. There's a pattern to their movements, their feeding habits, and more importantly, I think I've found a way to predict where they'll appear next. Jake whistled low. That's incredible, Doc. With this, we could actually get ahead of them for once. As we celebrated this small victory, I noticed something odd. Agent Hawkins was speaking urgently into her earpiece, her eyes darting between us and the data on the screen. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, and the doors to the lab slammed shut with a pneumatic hiss. What's going on? I shouted over the noise. Hawkins's voice was cold as she drew her weapon. I'm sorry, but we can't let you leave with that information. It's too valuable. Realization dawned on me with horrifying clarity. You never intended to help us stop them, did you? You want to control them. The agent's silence was all the confirmation we needed. You fools, Jack growled. You have no idea what you're dealing with. These aren't some weapons you can leash and point at your enemies. They're ancient, hungry, and they'll consume everything if we don't stop them. Hawkins shrugged, seemingly unconcerned. That's a risk we're willing to take for the potential benefits. Now, step away from the computers. You're all about to have a tragic lab accident. Time seemed to slow down. I saw Jake inching towards a fire extinguisher on the wall. Dr. Reeves's hand hovered over the keyboard, ready to initiate some command. Jack's eyes met mine, and I knew we were thinking the same thing. We had to get out of here, had to warn the world about what was really going on. What happened next was a blur of action. Jake grabbed the fire extinguisher, spraying it in Hawkins's face. Dr. Reeves hit a key, and suddenly all the screens in the lab went dark. Jack tackled one of the other agents, creating chaos in the confined space. I made a dash for the door controls, desperately trying to override the lockdown. As I worked, I heard shouts, the sound of breaking glass, and then, most terrifyingly, a familiar whispering that seemed to come from the very shadows themselves. The Shadow Eaters, I gasped. They're here. Whether drawn by the conflict or simply taking advantage of the darkness caused by the power fluctuations, the shadow creatures began to manifest in the corners of the lab. I saw agents and scientists alike recoil in horror as tendrils of living darkness reached for them. In the chaos, we managed to force open the doors and flee into the hallway. Alarms still blared, and the emergency lights cast an eerie red glow that only seemed to strengthen the shadows. "We need to get out of here now," Jack yelled over the noise. "And we need to destroy all their research. They can't be allowed to continue this madness." As we ran through the twisting corridors, trying to find an exit, I couldn't help but feel a sense of bitter irony. We had come here hoping for help, for a way to fight the darkness. Instead, we had found that the real monsters weren't just in the shadows, they were in the hearts of those who would try to use this terror for their own gain. We burst out of the facility into the cool night air, gasping and disoriented. Behind us, we could hear shouts and the ominous sound of whispering shadows. "What now?" Jake panted as we ran towards the perimeter fence. "Now," I said, my resolve hardening. "We do this on our own. No more trusting anyone but ourselves. We find a way to stop the Shadow Eaters, and we warn the world about what's really going on." As we escaped into the night, I knew that our task had just become infinitely harder. We were now fugitives, hunted by both the shadows and those who would seek to control them. But we had each other, and we had the truth. It would have to be enough. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also strengthened our resolve. The real fight was just beginning, and we were ready for it. As we disappeared into the darkness, I silently vowed that we would bring this conspiracy to light no matter the cost. The shadows may have eyes, but now, so did we. The cold metal of the restraints bit into my wrists as I regained consciousness. My head throbbed, and the sterile smell of disinfectant filled my nostrils. As my vision cleared, I realized I was in a small, dimly lit room with no windows. A single fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Hello?" I called out, my voice hoarse. "Is anyone there?" Silence answered me, broken only by the soft hum of unseen machinery. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I noticed a camera in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. They were watching me. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to think. How long had I been here? Where were the others? The last thing I remembered was fleeing the government facility, then a sharp pain in my neck. They must have tranquilized us. Suddenly, the shadows in the corner of the room seemed to deepen, swirling in a way that defied natural physics. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what it meant. "No," I whispered. "Not here. Not now." But the Shadow Eaters didn't care about my pleas. A tendril of darkness reached out, brushing against my cheek with a touch colder than death. I could hear their whispers in my mind, ancient and hungry. "Get away from me," I shouted, thrashing against my restraints. Just then, the door burst open, flooding the room with harsh light. The shadows retreated, but I knew they were still there, waiting. A man in a white lab coat entered, flanked by 2 armed guards. His eyes gleamed with an unsettling mix of fear and excitement. "Fascinating," he murmured, looking from me to the corner where the shadows had been. "You can see them, can't you? Interact with them?" I glared at him, refusing to answer. He sighed, pulling up a chair to sit across from me. "Miss Chen, I'm Dr. Erickson. I'm here to help you understand what's happening." I couldn't suppress a bitter laugh. "Help me? You drugged me, kidnapped me, and now you're what? Experimenting on me?" Erickson had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I understand your anger, but you have to see the bigger picture. What's happening with these shadow entities? It could change everything. We need to understand them, control them." "Control them?" I spat. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. These things are ancient, powerful. They'll consume everything if we don't stop them." The scientist leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Exactly. Imagine if we could harness that power, use it to protect our nation, to reshape the world." I shook my head in disbelief. "You're insane. You're going to get us all killed." Erickson stood, straightening his lab coat. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Ms. Chen, but you'll come around eventually. You're too valuable to us to let go." As he turned to leave, I called out, "Wait, where are my friends? What have you done with them?" He paused at the door. "They're safe, for now. Cooperate and they'll stay that way." With that, he left, the door locking behind him with a final sounding click. I slumped in my chair, despair threatening to overwhelm me. But as I sat there, feeling the shadows pulse and writhe at the edges of the room, an idea began to form. They wanted to understand the Shadow Eaters? Fine. I'd use that against them. I closed my eyes, focusing on the whispering darkness. Slowly, carefully, I reached out with my mind, the way Jack had taught me. The shadows responded, curling around my thoughts like curious cats. I need your help, I thought at them, and in return I can offer you something you want. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were listening. These people want to trap you, use you, I continued. Help me escape, and I'll lead you to places full of fear and darkness, places where you can feed. For a long moment nothing happened. Then suddenly the shadows exploded into motion. They flooded the room, extinguishing the light and plunging everything into pitch blackness. I felt the cold touch of the shadows on my skin seeping into the locks of my restraints. With a soft click, they opened, and I was free. Heart pounding, I stumbled to the door, feeling my way in the darkness. To my shock, it swung open easily. The Shadow Eaters had disabled the electronic lock. I stepped into the hallway, blinking in the sudden brightness. Alarms were blaring, and I could hear shouts and running footsteps in the distance. I need to find the others, I muttered to myself, picking a direction at random and starting to run. As I navigated the maze-like facility, I witnessed horrifying scenes. In some rooms, I saw scientists huddled in circles of light, desperately trying to fend off writhing masses of shadow. In others, I glimpsed strange machines hooked up to containers of swirling darkness, attempts to capture and study the Shadow Eaters. I turned a corner and nearly collided with a group of armed guards. They raised their weapons, but before they could fire, tendrils of shadow lashed out from the walls, engulfing them. Their screams were quickly silenced. I pressed on, trying to ignore the guilt gnawing at me. I had unleashed this chaos, made a deal with entities I barely understood. But I had to focus on finding my friends and escaping. After what felt like hours of searching, I finally heard a familiar voice. "Let us out, you bastards." Jake's muffled shout came from behind a heavy metal door. I rushed over, searching for a way to open it. "Jake, it's Mia. Are you all in there?" "Mia?" Dr. Reeves's voice this time. "Thank God. We thought they'd killed you." "Stand back from the door," I warned them. Then, feeling slightly ridiculous, I addressed the shadows. "I need your help again, please." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding screech, the door began to bend and warp, twisted by forces beyond human comprehension. It tore free from its hinges, revealing my friends huddled inside. Jack was the first to recover from his shock. "Mia, what did you do?" I helped them out of the room, trying to ignore the way the shadows seemed to cling to me now. "I made a deal. Come on, we need to get out of here." As we ran through the facility, I filled them in on what had happened. Jake looked horrified, Dr. Reeves fascinated, and Jack just looked grim. "You don't know what you've done, Mia," he said as we paused to catch our breath. "Making deals with the Shadow Eaters? It's dangerous. They always take more than they give." I was about to argue when we heard a commotion ahead. Agent Hawkins appeared, leading a group of heavily armed soldiers. Her eyes widened when she saw us. "Stop them," she shouted. "Don't let them escape." We turned to run but found our path blocked by more guards. We were trapped. Hawkins approached, her gun trained on us. "It's over," she said. "You've seen too much. We can't let you leave." I felt the shadows pulse around me, eager for more chaos, more fear. I knew I could unleash them again, wipe out Hawkins and her men in seconds, but the cost would be too high. Instead, I stepped forward, hands raised. "Agent Hawkins, listen to me. The Shadow Eaters can't be controlled. What you're doing here, it's going to destroy everything." She hesitated, uncertainty flashing across her face. "You don't understand. We're trying to save the world." "By unleashing ancient shadow monsters?" Jake scoffed. "Yeah, great plan." Dr. Reeves spoke up, her voice calm and reasonable. "Agent, I've studied the data. These entities are growing stronger, spreading faster than we can contain them. Your experiments are only making it worse." Hawkins' resolve seemed to waver. But our orders? To hell with your orders, Jack growled. Look around you. This facility is overrun. How long before it spreads to the rest of the world? As if to emphasize his point, a tendril of shadow snaked across the floor, causing the soldiers to step back in alarm. I took a deep breath, knowing what I had to do. Agent Hawkins, I can call them off. I can make the Shadow Eaters retreat. But you have to let us go. Let us find a way to stop this for good. For a long moment, Hawkins stared at me, conflict clear in her eyes. Then, slowly, she lowered her weapon. Go, she said quietly. Before I change my mind. We didn't need to be told twice. As we ran for the exit, I concentrated, reaching out to the shadows that had aided our escape. Thank you, I thought at them. Now leave this place. Go back to the dark forests where you belong. I felt their reluctance, their hunger, but slowly, grudgingly, they began to withdraw. The oppressive darkness that had filled the facility started to lift. We burst out of the building into the cool night air, gasping and disoriented. Behind us, we could hear shouts and the sound of approaching vehicles. We need to move, Jack said urgently. They won't let us go easily. As we ran towards the perimeter fence, I couldn't help but look back at the facility. The shadows were retreating, but I could still feel their presence, their watchful eyes. I knew this was far from over. We managed to slip past the fence and into the surrounding forest. Only when we were deep among the trees did we finally slow down, collapsing to the ground in exhaustion. What now? Jake panted, looking around at our bedraggled group. I sat up, my resolve hardening. Now we do what we set out to do. We find a way to stop the Shadow Eaters for good this time. No more government interference, no more deals with darkness, just us. Doctor, Reeves nodded, her eyes gleaming with determination. I managed to download some of their research before we escaped. It's not much, but it's a start. Jack placed a hand on my shoulder, his expression grave. Mia, what you did back there, it was incredibly dangerous. The Shadow Eaters won't forget. They'll come for you again. I met his gaze steadily. I know, but I'll be ready for them. We all will be. As we sat there in the darkness of the forest, I could feel the weight of our task pressing down on us. We were fugitives now, hunted by both human and shadow forces. The odds were stacked against us, but as I looked at my friends, saw the determination in their eyes, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had escaped the facility, outsmarted those who would use the Shadow Eaters for their own gain. We had seen the depths of human folly and the heights of inhuman terror, and we were still standing. The path ahead was dark and uncertain, but we would face it together. The Shadow Eaters had made a grave mistake in revealing themselves to us. Now, armed with knowledge and united in purpose, we would bring their reign of darkness to an end. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, we stood up, ready to begin the next phase of our journey. The world was changing, shadows were deepening, but we were the light that would push them back. The escape was just the beginning. The real battle was about to begin. The forest seemed to close in around us as we stumbled through the underbrush, exhaustion weighing heavily on our limbs. We had been on the run for days, always one step ahead of both the government agents and the encroaching shadows. We can't keep this up much longer, Jake panted, leaning against a tree. We need a plan, a safe place to regroup. Dr. Reeves nodded, her usual composure frayed at the edges. I agree. But where? The Shadow Eaters seem to be everywhere now. I was about to respond when a twig snapped behind us. We whirled around, hearts racing, ready for another confrontation. But what we saw left us speechless. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving with an otherworldly grace. It was a woman, or at least something that looked like a woman. Her skin seemed to shimmer as if caught between solidity and shadow. Her eyes, when they met mine, were ancient and unfathomable. What are you? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure smiled, a gesture both comforting and terrifying. I am many things, Mia-Chen, but you may call me Arya. I've been waiting for you. Jack stepped forward, placing himself protectively in front of our group. How do you know Mia's name? What do you want from us? Arya's gaze shifted to Jack, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Ah, the Guardian. Your kind has served well over the centuries, but the old ways are failing now, aren't they? Before Jack could respond, Arya gestured deeper into the forest. Come, it's not safe to linger here. I have much to tell you, and little time to do so. We exchanged wary glances, unsure whether to trust this mysterious figure. But something in her presence commanded attention, and we found ourselves following her through the darkening woods. After what felt like hours of walking, we emerged into a clearing unlike anything I had ever seen. The air shimmered with an ethereal light, and the shadows here seemed alive but not menacing. At the center stood an ancient tree, its trunk twisted into impossible shapes. Arya turned to face us, her form seeming to flicker between solid and shadow. Welcome to my sanctuary. Here, we are hidden from both your human pursuers and the hunger of the Shadow Eaters. Dr. Reeves stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her caution. What is this place? And who? What are you, really? Arya's smile held a hint of sadness. I am a guardian, sworn to keep the balance between light and shadow. This place is one of the last bastions of that balance in your world. Our world, Jake interjected. You talk as if you're not from here. In a sense, I am not, Arya replied. I have existed since before your kind learned to harness fire. I have watched the ebb and flow of light and darkness across eons. I felt a chill run down my spine. You're one of them, aren't you? A Shadow Eater? Arya nodded slowly. I was, but I chose a different path. I saw the beauty in your world, in the interplay of light and shadow. I swore to protect that balance. Jack's eyes narrowed. If you're such a powerful guardian, why are the Shadow Eaters gaining strength now? Why haven't you stopped them? Arya's form seemed to dim slightly, her expression grave. The balance has shifted, Guardian. Your world has grown darker in ways that have nothing to do with the absence of light. Fear, despair, hatred. These feed the Shadow Eaters more than any darkness ever could. She waved her hand, and the air before us shimmered, showing images of conflict, environmental destruction, and human suffering. Your kind has been inadvertently strengthening the Shadow Eaters for decades, and now they grow bold enough to hunt openly. Dr. Reeves leaned forward, studying the images intently. Is there no way to stop them? To restore the balance? Arya's gaze met mine, and I felt a weight settle on my shoulders. There is a way, but it requires great sacrifice and perfect timing. She waved her hand again, and the images shifted to show a celestial event, a rare alignment of planets that would plunge much of the world into an extended night. In 3 days' time, this alignment will occur, Arya explained. It will grant the Shadow Eaters unprecedented power, but it also presents an opportunity. An opportunity for what? I asked, dreading the answer. To bind them, Arya said simply. To create a new balance, one that will hold for millennia to come. But to do so requires a conduit, someone who can bridge the gap between your world and theirs. All eyes turned to me, and I felt a sinking in my gut. Me? You mean me, don't you? Arya nodded solemnly. You have a rare gift, Mia. You can see them, interact with them in ways few humans can. With the right ritual, at the right moment, you could become the linchpin of a new equilibrium. Jake stepped forward, his voice angry. No way. We're not sacrificing Mia for some cosmic balancing act. There has to be another way. I agree, Dr. Reeves added. The risks are too great. We don't even fully understand what these Shadow Eaters are, let alone how to bind them. Jack remained silent, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. What exactly would this ritual entail? And what would it cost Mia? Arya's form flickered, growing more shadow-like. The ritual is ancient, complex. It would require Mia to stand at the threshold between light and dark to become a living bridge. As for the cost, she hesitated. It would change you, Mia. You would no longer be fully human, but something in between. A heavy silence fell over the clearing. I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze, the burden of this impossible choice. I need time to think, I said finally, my voice shaking. Arya nodded. Of course. Rest here, all of you. You are safe for now. When you are ready, I will teach you what you need to know. As Arya's form dissolved into the shadows of the great tree, we were left alone in the shimmering clearing. The others immediately burst into heated discussion, arguing about the merits and dangers of Arya's proposal. I stepped away, needing a moment to process everything we'd learned. As I approached the edge of the clearing, I felt a familiar presence, the whisper of shadow eaters held at bay by whatever power protected this place. Mia. Jack's gruff voice startled me. He approached, his face etched with concern. You're not seriously considering this, are you? I sighed, running a hand through my tangled hair. What choice do we have, Jack? You've seen what's happening out there. The shadows are spreading, and nothing we've done has been able to stop them. But at what cost, he argued. Becoming some kind of hybrid being. Mia, that's not a fate I'd wish on anyone. I turned to face him, suddenly angry. And what about the fate of everyone else? If we don't do something, the whole world will be consumed by darkness. How can I not at least consider it? Jack's expression softened. I understand, believe me. But Mia, we don't even know if we can trust this Arya. For all we know, this could be an elaborate trap. His words gave me pause. He had a point. We were operating on faith, trusting an entity we barely understood. As if summoned by our doubts, Arya's voice drifted to us on the wind. Your suspicion is wise, Guardian. But know this, if I meant you harm, you would already be lost to the shadows. She materialized before us, her form more solid now. I understand your hesitation, but time grows short and the shadow eaters grow stronger. Will you at least let me teach you the ritual? Then you can decide. I looked at Jack, seeing the conflict in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. We'll learn, but we're not committing to anything yet. Over the next day, Arya taught us the intricacies of the binding ritual. It was complex, drawing on energies I could barely comprehend. The others helped where they could. Dr. Reeves analyzing the scientific principles behind the energy manipulation, Jake using his investigative skills to draw connections between seemingly disparate elements, and Jack providing insights from his years of guarding against shadow incursions. As we worked, I found my resolve strengthening. This was bigger than my fears, bigger than any one person. If I could help stop the shadow eaters, didn't I have an obligation to try? On the eve of the celestial alignment, we gathered once more in the heart of the clearing. Arya stood before us, her form flickering between shadow and light. The time has come to decide, she said solemnly. Mia, are you prepared to undertake this burden? I took a deep breath, looking at each of my friends in turn. I saw fear in their eyes, but also trust and support. Whatever I decided, I knew they would stand by me. I have questions first, I said, turning back to Arya. If I do this, become this bridge between worlds, what happens to me? Will I still be me? Arya's expression was compassionate but unyielding. You will be changed, Mia. You will see the world in ways no human was meant to. You will have one foot in the realm of shadows and one in the light. It will be a lonely existence in many ways. I nodded, having expected as much. And if I refuse? What then? Then we fight on as we have been, Arya said simply. But know this. Without the binding, I fear the shadow eaters will soon grow too powerful to stop by any means. I closed my eyes, weighing the choices before me. The fate of the world against my own humanity. When I opened them again, I saw understanding dawn on my friends' faces before I even spoke. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll become the bridge." As Arya nodded solemnly and began to prepare for the ritual, doubt gnawed at me. Could we really trust her? Was I doing the right thing? But as I looked at the determination on my friends' faces, at the shimmering barrier holding back the encroaching shadows, I knew I had to try. The world was counting on us, whether it knew it or not. The binding ritual would begin at dawn. As we made our final preparations, I couldn't help but feel that regardless of the outcome, nothing would ever be the same again. The Shadow Eaters had changed our lives irrevocably, and now we were about to change theirs. The air grew thick with anticipation as we gathered on the outskirts of the city, our eyes fixed on the darkening sky. The celestial event we'd been dreading was upon us, a rare alignment that would plunge our world into an extended period of darkness, providing the perfect feeding ground for the Shadow Eaters. I turned to Sarah, the skeptical journalist who had become one of my closest allies in this nightmarish ordeal. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set with determination. "You ready for this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded grimly. "As ready as I'll ever be to face interdimensional shadow monsters. You know, when I took this job, I thought the worst I'd have to deal with was corrupt politicians." A wry chuckle escaped me. Funny how life turns out, isn't it? Dr. Einar, our cryptozoologist companion, approached with an armful of equipment. "The sensors are all in place," he reported. "If there's any fluctuation in the electromagnetic field when the Shadow Eaters appear, we'll know about it." The Guardian, the enigmatic being who had saved us from the government facility and taught us the binding ritual, stood a few paces away, her otherworldly eyes scanning the horizon. She hadn't spoken much since we'd arrived at our chosen battleground, and her silence unnerved me. As if sensing my unease, she turned to face us. "It begins," she said simply. No sooner had the words left her lips than the world around us began to change. The sky darkened rapidly, stars blinking out one by one as if swallowed by an encroaching void. A chill wind swept across the land, carrying with it whispers in a language too ancient for human ears to comprehend. "Holy shit," Sarah breathed, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. Dr. Einar's equipment began to beep frantically. "The readings are off the charts," he exclaimed. "Whatever's coming, it's big." I felt it before I saw it, a presence so vast and alien that my mind recoiled from its very concept. The shadows between the trees began to writhe and pulse, coalescing into forms that defied description. Eyes blinked open in the darkness, countless and hungry. "Now," the Guardian commanded, "begin the ritual." We scrambled to form a circle, each of us clutching a talisman she had provided. The words of the binding spell felt heavy on my tongue as I began to chant, my voice joining with those of my companions in a desperate symphony. As we invoked the ancient words, I felt a pressure building around us. The Shadow Eaters were aware of our efforts, and they were fighting back. Tendrils of living darkness lashed out, testing the boundaries of our protective circle. "Keep going," the Guardian shouted over the howling wind. "Do not break the circle, no matter what you see or hear." The assault intensified. I saw Sarah stumble as a shadow tendril brushed against her leg, her face contorting in pain. "It's so cold," she gasped, "like it's sucking the life right out of me." "Stay strong," I encouraged her, even as I felt my own strength waning. We're the only thing standing between them and the rest of the world. As we continued the ritual, I became aware of a change in the Guardian. Her form seemed to flicker and shift, sometimes appearing human, sometimes something else entirely. With a start, I realized the truth. She wasn't just a Guardian. She was one of them. "You're a Shadow Eater," I accused, my voice cracking with the effort of maintaining the chant. She met my gaze unflinchingly. "I am, but I am also your only hope of survival." Dr. Einar's eyes widened in shock. "You've been lying to us this whole time?" "Not lying," she countered. "Withholding. Would you have trusted me if you'd known the truth from the beginning?" Before any of us could respond, A massive surge of shadow energy slammed into our circle. I felt myself being lifted off my feet, the world spinning around me in a dizzying kaleidoscope of darkness and pinprick lights. When everything settled, I found myself standing alone in a void, face to face with the Guardian. Her form was fluid now, constantly shifting between human and something utterly alien. "Why?" I demanded. "Why help us if you're one of them?" Her voice echoed strangely in the emptiness. "Because balance must be maintained. My kind have grown too powerful, too hungry. If we are not stopped, we will consume everything, including ourselves." Understanding dawned on me. "That's why you taught us the ritual. You're sacrificing your own people to save everything." She nodded solemnly. "But the ritual alone is not enough. It requires a final component, a bridge between worlds, someone who can see us for what we truly are." I felt a chill run down my spine as the implications of her words sank in. "Me," I whispered, "because I can see you. I'm the key to sealing you away." "Yes," she confirmed, "but the price is high. To complete the binding, you must become the new Guardian. You will walk the line between light and shadow, forever vigilant against the return of my kind." The weight of the choice before me was staggering. To save the world, I would have to give up everything, my life, my future, perhaps even my humanity. But as I thought of Sarah, Dr. Einar, and all the innocent people who would suffer if the Shadow Eaters weren't stopped, I knew there was only one decision I could make. "I'll do it," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Tell me what I need to do." The Guardian's form solidified into something almost human, a sad smile on her face. "You already know. Trust your instincts and do not falter." With those cryptic words, the void around us shattered. I found myself back in the circle with Sarah and Dr. Einar, the Shadow Eaters pressing in from all sides. But now, I could see them clearly, not just as amorphous darkness, but as beings of terrible beauty and cosmic horror. Drawing on a well of strength I didn't know I possessed, I raised my voice in a final incantation. The words poured from me, not in any human language, but in the primordial tongue of shadow and starlight. As I spoke, I felt a change come over me. My vision shifted, the world taking on new dimensions I had never perceived before. I could feel the pulse of the shadows, the ebb and flow of cosmic energies that underpinned reality itself. The Shadow Eaters recoiled, their forms wavering as the binding took hold. I saw fear in their countless eyes, fear of me, of what I had become. With a sound like the tearing of reality itself, a rift opened in the air before me. The Shadow Eaters were pulled towards it, their ethereal bodies stretching and distorting as they were drawn into the space between worlds. As the last of them vanished into the rift, I felt a final surge of power course through me. With a gesture, I sealed the breach, feeling the weight of my new responsibility settle upon me like a mantle. The unnatural darkness began to recede, stars peeking out from behind dissipating clouds. I turned to my friends, seeing them clearly despite the lingering shadows. Sarah stumbled towards me, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and concern. "Are you still you?" she asked hesitantly. I smiled, feeling both familiar and utterly changed. "I'm still me," I assured her. "Just more." Dr. Einar approached cautiously, his scientific curiosity warring with his lingering fear. "What happens now?" he inquired. I gazed out at the world around us, seeing it with new eyes, the delicate balance of light and shadow, the hidden places where reality wore thin. "Now," I said softly, "I watch, I guard, I make sure they never break through again." As dawn broke on a world forever changed, I knew that my journey was far from over. The shadows between the trees would always have eyes that blinked, but now those eyes would meet mine. A silent acknowledgement between a guardian and the darkness they kept at bay.